Praise the Lord, everyone. We'll have an invocation by Christopher Roddy.
Join me in a quick word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for this day and the opportunity to serve. I pray that our meeting be productive and we find the best path forward for serving our city. In Jesus' name, amen.
Stand for our pledge, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for attending our GLTC City Council work session meeting. And now I will turn you over to Ms. Donna Witt.
Is it better if I go to the podium?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm at your back. Oh, I can stick this in? Okay, maybe that's a little easier to hear me. I just wanted to open with there's been a lot of back and forth with memos and questions and responses, and just wanted to open with a few comments that maybe I can answer a few of those questions. I really feel like the city has been a good partner to GLTC, especially, I mean, I can speak for almost 27 years. The one reason we have an MOU is because we knew there had to be some help back and forth with GLTC, and that seemed like a reasonable way to do it. Through the years, there have been some financial challenges, but there's a big difference between a budget deficit and budget excess and having enough cash to operate your organization. And we experience that at the city as well, that the timing of payments doesn't always match up with when money needs to go out. And so we've tried, part of that MOU, there's really two pieces to it. Part of it is it's written in there that should GLTC end up at a deficit at the end of the fiscal year, the city will put that in. And that's why that reserve is there. And if you'll note, GLTC has not ended up with a deficit. So we have not gone to council to appropriate any of those funds to be used for operations because of a deficit at GLTC. But it's also written in that MOU that should there be a cash shortage, that they needed some help to pay payroll and other expenses until federal reimbursements or state reimbursements are paid, that the city would step in with a payment to help them float that period. And that's what's happened. There's some questions about the $940,000 that is owed to the city. And that was simply two payment requests. One was $500,000 that Josh assigned. That's loan request number one. And that was to get them through a period. It's dated July 31st, 2023. And the backup to that says estimated date to pay the city of Lynchburg back is August 31st, 2023. But that loan is still outstanding. But GLTC needed some more help. So we had a conversation with Josh and trying to work out their cash flow issues. And so the end of the fiscal year 23 ended with an excess of $441,283.50. So we had an agreement with Josh that if he would pay that payment as by the MOU, the excess would come back to the city. The very next day, we turned around and did loan payment number 2 to give that money back to GLTC. So that was the second loan payment, and those are the two that are outstanding. And it's difficult to understand all the things that have happened. So part of that is we had a federal shutdown, which slowed recoupments of payments even more. So there's always more things going on than just your everyday operations. So again, we've stepped in, we've tried to work with Josh to make sure that you all had the cash just to get you through fiscal year 26. So the city has our budget, we pay to GLTC in quarterly payments. So it's not based on a reimbursement or anything. We just divide that by 4 and make those in quarterly payments. But instead of making another loan to GLTC, the city forwarded the third quarter and fourth quarter payment early to GLTC to help them with this next cash issue. So there's always things going on beyond the scenes, but we're just trying to make sure that we are good partners with GLTC and making those happen. So what's in the budget? 25, 26, 27 have been a flat budget of our $1.8 million. In 27, we know there are challenges based on state funding, federal funding. There was also an issue in the 26 budget with your health claims and how you could be on the city's policy, which did not work because it was going to cost the city so much more, and it would cost you more than what you were currently paying. So that didn't necessarily come out, but it did leave you with a challenge in your federal funding. So we've looked through this, and in 27, instead of just saying, hey, you get flat funding and you make it work, that's why we set aside some funds out of this reserve, which are city funds, well over and above what the MOU required to be in the fund. That's all city funds. But we took that and said, hey, let's set aside this $800,000 and see how your fiscal year is going to work. And at council adoption, that could help make up your shortfall in 27. But we also thought, as we've looked at these other plans, that maybe a further study of the grants, the cash flow, all the other pieces of GLTC might be helpful. So that's why we set aside this $500,000, called it multimodal planning, but really it was a further look at all the ins and outs in GLTC to give you an opportunity to really do a deep dive into everything GLTC. So that's what those funds are for. But we left them on the city's books instead of just placing those in GLTC alongside with the budget operating money. It's for council to determine what is appropriate. That should be a council decision. So I'm glad that we can have this meeting today and maybe get some questions answered and see how we meet kind of in the middle and where we are and how we can continue to be good partners with each other. And then at the end of the meeting or the following days, if there's further questions, I'll be happy to answer those. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Mr. Josh Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing us to come in. And I think we've got some things that we want to go over as far as from the board's point of view and to look at some things for the future. As you're no doubt aware, when we give the city its budget, it is typically in the October and November timeframe because that's when the city usually wants a budget from us. So there are a lot of projections, and in particular this year, there were a lot of, we did not make very many assumptions on state funding due to some previous discussions we'd had with city staff where some of the funds that we've utilized in the past, the step-down funds, the funds that have a diminishing end date aren't as preferred for use for operating. And so that budget reflected that, which had a substantial increase on the city side. As we've gotten closer to the Commonwealth Transportation Board voting on the fiscal year 2027 budget, we've gotten firmer updates on those numbers. And some of those are also scoring metrics for how our service has worked over the last year, because as we are efficient in our service and our delivery compared to our peers, we gain additional state funding. And we have reason to believe that we're going to gain a chunk of state funding this year for that, although those numbers have not officially been released yet. So I think for that, after we hear from everyone else, then we can go in and kind of work through some of those. But we are appreciative to the city for the help that they have given in the past. As Donna had mentioned, we've had some cash flow issues because I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that the federal government has gotten less active in getting timely cash flows out. We get hung up in the processes with them a lot. And for one of the things, as opposed to simply taking the loans out multiple times, repaying them, and then immediately requiring another one from the city had worked with us to just leave that kind of sitting right there because we have needed that for a bit. And that is a separate discussion from what we're talking about as future years. Because one thing we would like to get from council is, where do we want transit to go in the next couple of years? Because we have an opportunity to take some multi-year grants, but they do have diminishing returns each year. And that is simply the way that the grant program is developed. So now is our time to decide if we want to use that or if we want to not take these grants.
Is there any discussion? Is there anyone? Vice Mayor?
I appreciate the information that I'm receiving. I enjoyed attending the GLTC event recently and got a real refresher on that. I think we do have some important decisions to make going forward. My one point thus far, just since nobody else had anything to say, is that I have a process concern. It's not really a concern, just a preference. I really appreciated the days when the department heads used to come before council and present to us what their needs were. And I think that facilitates good communication. And in the future, I would love to see that going again. I know that's not exactly the comment you might have expected from me, but it just goes to the overall communication between the department heads and council so that we can be responsive to their needs and hear what the needs of the public are from them.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Timmer?
First, I have a request, and then I have some comments to follow up on Mr. Deemer's comments. But I'd like to request that the letter submitted by the GLTC board be included in today's minutes. And I can pull up the email if we need the specific email to reference that. I believe it was sent out on Friday. But I think that this is an ongoing discussion, and that really speaks to Mr. Deemer's point that the budget process has somewhat become inverted, where we're now receiving these bottlenecks, whether it's with the school board or with GLTC, where the budget's being presented to us, the determination of what's significant or what's not significant is predetermined before council has the opportunity to review that and assess that from a large picture perspective. In addition to that, there seems to be a pattern where funding is being cut where there are areas of federal matches. And I think this really needs to be assessed in terms of our long-term trajectory and plan, whether we're looking at transportation or social services in the last budget, or the very long acronym that has to do with Meals on Wheels and oversees a lot of elderly care in our city. There are these areas that are getting cut that have other external funds that match those funds, and council hasn't been privy to that discussion in advance. And so we're not able to assess the priorities in the city accurately, and it's part of why we're starting to have the consternation and bottlenecks around the budget process, because that information isn't available for review until it's brought to our attention directly by a board of directors or a department head. So I echo Vice Mayor Deemer's comments and concerns. And in addition to that, I do want to request that the email from Friday from the GLTC board be included in today's minutes for the ongoing discussion. Thank you.
Mr. Wilder?
Again, thank you for the information. I really appreciate that. All the emails go back and forth, and all the backgrounds from Mr. Patrick as well. So I appreciate all the emails. Thank you, Ms. Witt, for the conversation. I'm glad to see that a reserve amount has been set aside for GLTC for like a rainy day fund or whatever you call it. So support them. So I'm glad to see that. Transportation is so crucial for all of our citizens. Make sure to get to their jobs and interviews and church and all the other places. So we understand the importance of GLTC for especially the underserved population, how important it is to make sure we work together to do that. I know they have received some cuts. I know Liberty was a major factor some time ago. So a lot of those funds are gone. So I understand that. So those funds have to be made up as well to continue to support the efforts of GLTC. I'm looking forward to the study, you would call it, to look at the routes, look at funding, look at various measures to help support GLTC so they can be stronger, so we can be more efficient in our services. One thing I'd like to make note is that when we reduce funding, I've been on city council for about 10 years. So when we reduce funding, whether real estate tax or whatever the case may be, there's less funds to go around. So when that happens, it's going to cause a bottleneck because there's less funds in our whole budget that everybody said, oh, but give me this fund, give me this funds. And so many times it amazes me how we are so surprised and shocked that when the funds are less, oh my gosh, there are less funds because there are less funds coming in. So it's always going to be an effect when you bring less funds in. So make sure we can continue to remember that when we reduce income coming into the city, it's going to affect all of our departments, whether it's Parks and Rec or the Templeton Center or the center on Wiggins Road or whatever the case may be. Those things are going to have an effect in our community. Now, Ms. Witt, does your department normally work with GLTC in discussing funds on a consistent basis? As needed? Okay. Do you need more communication with our city staff members about the process or the funding stream?
No, I don't think that's it, because typically typically I think for communication on the city funds, we usually have a fairly good communication with the city. They request the budget, and then we submit what we are looking at for local match funds. It has been GLTC's, the board's guidance and GLTC's past practice that we try to minimize the local match as much as possible. So what that means is that we are trying to pull in as many state and federal funds as we are able to reduce the burden to the city. However, to access many of those funds, they require a local match. So in the case of federal funding, which is our largest pot, it requires a 50% local match, and that is a hard number that cannot be exceeded. So we usually stay just under it to be safe. But it also requires matching expenses. So there's a couple of pieces that have to be juggled, and that is why sometimes when we look at slight tweaks in funding for GLTC, why the amount on the end comes out to a much larger amount, because right now we are not overmatched on local match funds. We basically have the minimal amount to pull what we think we need. And unfortunately in the past, when we had Liberty Service, those counted as local match funds, so that gave us a much bigger pot. Also that ridership and those metrics scored for our state operating funding, as well as for a federal funding pot that gives funding for systems that exceed certain parameters. And all of that additional funding went away once we had lost Liberty Service. And that is really kind of in the last 2.5 years come to the fore. We utilized CARES funds and ARP funds to mitigate some of that for the first years. But we really have, in the last couple of years, started to see the effects of that. Now our ridership has increased significantly, which is a big driver for our metrics, as well as for our peers. We are fairly aggressive on controlling our costs. And so that scores us fairly well statewide. And so we've actually started to see some rebounds in our state funding because of that. But that has a multi-year lag. And so it's generally 2 to 3 years on the lag for that. So we're in essence now just climbing up from the bottom of the trough post-COVID, even though our ridership has been increasing year over year. And so that's a piece of it. one of the things that we have in the presentation today is looking at what is called the TRIP grant. It is a multi-year transit funding grant. It's a discretionary grant, which is why it was not originally included in our look at this year's budget, because we weren't 100% sure we were going to get it. It replaces our existing demonstration grant for our microtransit service, which was awarded for existing service that we had, but we changed to a brand new mode and a brand new method that had not been done before in the state. So we actually received funding to cover 80% of the operating cost on that for these years. And so that helped offset some of these last couple of years where we've had flat funding, because I don't think it's a surprise to anybody, but especially here in the last month or two, fuel prices have significantly increased. Wages have gone up. Health insurance is one thing for us that has been extremely, injurious in the last couple of years. We've had an average of a 30% health insurance increase for the last couple of years. And that is, unfortunately, that's something we provide for our employees, but that is money that is purely overhead, and that cuts into what we can provide as service. As well as we've pointed out with our Sunday service, it's hard for us to attract CDL operators, and so that is also affecting some of our service in a sort of a knock-on effect, and increases what we have to spend for training and trying to attract new operators. So.
Very helpful information. I appreciate that. Now, as far as board representation, I know we have a designated person on the GLTC board. Is that helpful? Do you need more, or has that been helpful for you?
The city appoints all of the GLTC board members. Ms. Braun is currently the representative from the city manager's office. Mr. Patrick was previously. Mr. White, Mr. Hughes had been as well. And then prior to that, I believe it was Mr. Payne and then Mr. Verchek. So we've had a relationship there with the city manager's office. And then as well as, our board members are all appointed by council and, very involved.
And last point, I just want to commend all of our city staff. When I go to the meetings, I'm always amazed, whether it's police or fire department or GLTC, the work they do behind the scenes in finding additional funds for our city. I am always amazed at that. So I really want to commend all of our city staff for always being vigilant and finding whether it's the grant funds from the attorney's for the city attorney and bringing in more funds for our city. Sometimes I think I don't know if people really understand all that, but we're so blessed that we have those extra resources to keep our city functioning so we can keep our expenses down. So I want to commend your staff and all the other staff members for always finding resources to bring it to the city to make a big difference. So thank you for that. That's all. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Josh, for being here, and also our board chair, Cameron Howe, and the rest of the board members that are here. Appreciate you all being here. Just a couple really questions that I've got. One of the things that concerns me with what we're doing with GLTC is you spoke about ridership, right? And how does the ridership impact the formulas for when we get funding for infrastructure projects like 501-221 and things like that? Is there any kind of impact there where if we have a decrease in ridership, it could affect things? Is that?
So that is a possibility. And I don't have the exact scoring metrics from the smart scale process from VDOT, which is the process that funds that. However, each of the years that the city has applied for smart scale funding, GLTC has written a letter of support. We provide our service metrics, including ridership, how many vehicles we have going through there, and all of that information to help to score that. That does actually help in the application process, and we are glad for that. And one of the things that the city has included is also looked at increasing some of the amenities that we have. So there's actually plans for that 501 section behind Fresh Market to include a bus bay and a shelter location for us. Shelters are very difficult for us in that the city is an older city, and in lots of places, right-of-ways are very small or non-existent. And so we have trouble with putting up amenities. And so in this case, the city is making sure that that's being included there as well, because that is a major transfer point for us.
So that's, I guess, speaking to all involved here with this, is that's a real concern of mine. You know, we've had some delays with that 501(c)(21) project. So whatever decisions we do make, if we make a decision that could impact service and then reduce ridership, I'd like to know the potential impact that could have on funding for 501(c)(21) or anything related to that, or any other infrastructure project for that matter. If it's going to make it less competitive for us for the smart scale funding, that's something I'd be interested in knowing about. That was the primary question that I had. I think I'm good for now. If it comes back, I'll let you know. Thank you.
Ms. Timmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The follow-up questions that I have in the immediate have to do with the health insurance funds as well as the rainy day funds that have been referenced, and this could go to either of you all or board members. The health insurance funds, Mr. Moore, I believe you referenced a 30% increase, and that's identified in the letter that was a projected increase that you all anticipated, but there had been discussions around that. Could you help me better understand those discussions, and could we have a further discussion on what that could look like on the city's part to either incorporate you all in the city's health insurance plan, or how that breakout has essentially occurred? But I'd like to defer to the board first, and then that would be awesome. And then also the rainy day funds, because if I understand correctly, and I could be wrong on this, the funds that we're looking at now are city funds in the general unassigned fund balance to essentially come over with GLTC. But there's a GLTC rainy day fund, but the MOU has specific stipulations around how those funds can be applied. And it seems in the back and forth that there's confusion around the MOU or disagreement about how those funds can be applied in the context of the MOU. And so I would welcome greater understanding of the discrepancies there.
So in looking at the health insurance.
I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah,
you got to
there we
lean
go.
in.
So it takes a second. In looking at the health insurance, so 2 years ago, we experienced a 36% increase in our health insurance cost. That added roughly $382,000 to our budget. That was obviously not expected because for many years we had very small increases, so single percentages, sometimes as low as 1 or 2%. So a 36% increase was a big hit. Last year we had a 24% increase. So if you average those two together, that comes out as 30%. This year, just on information that we had heard from our brokers, we had tentatively put in another 30% increase. Obviously we're hoping that it's going to be less than that. So a couple of things that we had done before, we had spoken with the city about possibly joining city schools and city of Lynchburg on their health insurance plan. I think one of the biggest problems would have been that the city's stop loss for its employees is much higher than we would feel safe with, and that there didn't seem to be a mechanism where we could either reinsure that or somehow adjust that without causing there to be an adjustment for the entire city, which would have been a very big expense for the city. And so unfortunately, we had looked at requesting some additional funds last year to cover health insurance. We had backed down. We thought we were going to be able to join on. After the start of this current budget year, that didn't work out. So we ended up staying with our current fully insured health insurance product. But we are in the process of looking at forming a statewide transit specific health insurance pool with a number of our peers to basically do health insurance the same way that GLTC was a founder of transit liability insurance. So we actually are controlling board members of a transit liability insurance pool, which is where we fund our insurance for our vehicles. So we're looking at doing the same thing for health insurance to kind of control some of those costs. So I know you had a multi-part question, but I guess I'll pause here so we can finish health insurance. Donna, if you wanted to.
No, I think what Josh said is accurate. We kind of had an email exchange back and forth as we're trying to work through the health claims and how they could join us if it was going to be possible, and came to the point that we would budget them flat. It wasn't a reduction. We would budget them flat from prior year and then try to continue to work out the stop loss. But unfortunately, it was going to cost the city millions to be able to reduce our stop loss. That's one way that we keep the city's insurance more reasonable, is because we do have such a high stop loss, and it was going to cost GLTC a lot more to come on our insurance than just trying to move forward on their own because of that high stop loss. It wasn't going to work. So that's kind of where we ended up.
And then the second part, that's very helpful. Thank you. I think for me and in reviewing some of this, a lot of this has to do with timeline and communication and how that works, again, in regard to the budget process and the timing of the understanding of the stop loss and how that would have applied to GLTC, because it seems that that's in part what has created essentially the need for recovery in some areas. And so that communication flow is just a larger concern that I have. But the MOU aspect, I'd really welcome some understanding of, because it seems that there's different views of how the GLTC reserve can be applied in the context of the larger MOU when it comes to the GLTC board and when it comes to the city manager's office perspective.
So the way we established the MOU was the same way it works with schools. At the end of the year, if there is a return of fund balance, it comes back to the city and becomes city funds. So we used to have an MOU with schools that they could ask for that back and council could appropriate it back to them. So this essentially does the same thing, except that it basically states, yes, when there's a budget excess, that money comes back to the city and becomes city funds. But the MOU states, however, if you end up in a deficit, the city is going to set aside this reserve of no less than $500,000 that should there be a deficit, I can go back to council and use those funds to fill in that deficit. But the other part of the MOU is the no more than 30 days up to 90 days of a cash loan that's outside that reserve in order just to help them wait until they get their federal reimbursement, and then they generally have been able to pay that cash back. So those are the two pieces of the reserve.
And I think to add to that, we also have what's caused a little bit of confusion is there's a separate capital fund that we have traditionally pulled capital expenses from. And so that has caused some confusion on both staff's part as well as the board. We had thought at one point, due to some references, that the capital fund was also the same as the fund set aside for the reserve. And so that has also caused a little bit of confusion.
Well, and I can tell you how the capital fund works. So we work with Josh and determine how many buses he is asking for in his budget to the feds and the state. And generally there's a local match. And so what we've done is used our pay-as-you-go money to put that into the capital fund so that we have the local match. Well, and then that money stays in the capital fund and they use it how they've needed to. So based on how many buses they actually got. But through COVID, I believe, and even now, you've not been able to get the number of buses that you thought you were at. Well, you asked for more buses than what you actually got. So, but based on how long it takes to get a vehicle and all that, it's not that simple. But we've used city funds to set aside to pay for the local portion. So Those have kind of accumulated in our capital fund each year. And so we've just, it got to the point that we have enough money in there that city funds from PAYGO to be able to pay the local portion as needed for the buses. So it's really, that's completely separate and has nothing to do with the MOU.
And so I will point out that also one of the reasons that's funded is as we do budget so early, we typically use a placeholder number for the local contribution, which is the top of the range for what the local contribution would be. But many times we receive federal funds and state funds that significantly lower that, all the way down to sometimes the local contribution being 4%. And so any of those savings also remain invested in that. But that is one of the other ways that we're striving very diligently to utilize additional funding to reduce that local expense. So it's not just on the operating side, but it's also on the capital side. Part of it is just simply timing because the city needs its budget so much earlier than the process for the states and the feds. Because just for everybody's edification, the federal fiscal year starts in October and runs to September. So they don't even start looking at applications until this time of the year. That's when they have their applications open. And so there's always a lag for their applications, whereas the state has the standard American business fiscal year, so it lines up a little bit better.
Thank you.
Ms. Sprouse?
Hello. Okay. I think one of the things, from the MOU perspective, and what's a little hard for me as a board member, to understand, even from my personal, work and life, is just the budgeting ins and outs and just ensuring that everything, is being discussed, we understand, but also from the MOU perspective, 2012 was a long time ago, and we all know whether it's, city operations or whether it's our personal operations, inflation has taken a great pain point for all of us. And, from the bus standpoint alone, the inflationary costs there are just tremendous. So I think that, out of this partnership and collaboration, relooking at the MOU, updating it with current, inflationary perspective would be a good outcome as well, after we see presentation and have all of this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So there's just a couple points I wanted to make. I think one of the things I noticed since I think this all kind of came to light at our council meetings and some of the communication was maybe the breakdown of communication and the confusion around it, which was, I know that there was an April 5th PDC meeting that was scheduled where this was supposed to come up. Is that correct, Mayor? Right. And so we had talked to you, Josh, about maybe some of this coming up at finance when we asked about kind of why weren't these concerns brought up when we talked to you there. So maybe just breakdown in communication that moving forward can be addressed better between the entities where we can, because I don't want us to get into a place where there's not a blame game here. I don't think there's a failure of the city and the budget process or anything. I mean, there's no fault here. It's about communicating between a partnership, right? We don't want to see GLTC fail because it is a very necessary thing that our citizens rely on. It is extremely important that we have a good operating system in place for our citizens to use. So how do we help that? How do we help that succeed? And how do we work to better support the process? Obviously, when we have buses that are not being filled on certain routes, what do we do there? I mean, one of my suggestions, I know when I had that great tour last year and I got to ride around, I got to see the different vehicles that you have that are great. What are some of, I'm sure you're already doing this, but this is more for people that are watching, listening. We have minibuses and vans, and are you exploring the routes that maybe we can utilize those vehicles on to consolidate, which would be a cheaper method to run on certain routes. Those are some thoughts I've been having. With the bus driver shortage, obviously, I understand some of the challenges you're facing there. So that's a concern we have to deal with. Not sure what to do about that, but we do need good bus drivers and qualified bus drivers that are, doing what they need to do so that they can fill the job. But I think it's just communication, right? And so it's us knowing what we can do, what we can't do, communicating properly, and not trying to make anybody look like they're failing, because we all want to help each other here. So just moving forward, I think that's important.
And so I think I can answer for the GLTC board in that we're more than happy to come and talk to council at any point. Finance committee is one that's kind of really focused on just looking at where we've been in the last couple months. And so just trying to be cognizant of council's time. We didn't really think that was a good place to bring that. So we're more than willing if council wants a specific report at any period. We can bring that to a work session. We can bring that to a council meeting. We can bring that to whatever is the pleasure of council. We're more than happy to do that.
I think the point, and I appreciate that, of having a city representative on the board is to help deconflict some of the concerns. And I think that could have happened, and some of the lack of confusion would have probably occurred between that relationship. I know there was some back and forth with Mechi. Where is she? Oh, sorry. And that's the benefit of having that representative on the board to help answer some of those questions. So, and I think she was doing that. But I think you're right, and I understand the purpose of what normally when you come to finance, you're briefing us on, the quarterly financials and everything. But I do think that we just, again, there may have been a breakdown of communication, and I think moving forward, all of us just do a better job of that. So there's not any confusion with the public. And again, it's not anybody from one side or the other not doing a good job. It's just how do we work together to make things more successful? Yes.
Madam President, Mrs. Howe would like to say something, and then I was going to answer the second part of your question after. So.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Okay. I was just going to say that in the 6 years that I've been on the GLTC board, we've had 4 different representatives from the city manager's office during that time. And I do have concerns regarding that turnover because it does make it difficult to develop those relationships, have that institutional knowledge. And so I do think that that's one area that we can improve. And I'll swing back around to my other point in a minute. You can answer a question.
In answering your question about looking at additional things that we can do to be more efficient, so we do actually have some efficiencies for this year in talking about vehicles and stuff. That is one of the reasons that we had pursued this microtransit study, is to look at actually reducing underperforming fixed routes and utilizing microtransit, which is utilizing an ADA accessible minivan. There are going to be some differences, and that's one of the things that we do have in the presentation and talk about long term, because a transit bus actually, for all of its costs, is intended to last for 14 to 15 years, and we routinely get that and more from them. The minivans only have a 4-year useful life, and they will only make 4 years because of the mileage that we're putting on them and the use. And so that is going to have a shift in how we spend capital, because it will be a much more common, here we have, it's a smaller purchase, but it's going to be a much more common purchase every single year, every couple of years, whereas before we tended to get them in longer terms. So that's a little bit of a fundamental shift for us as an agency, because we do have routes that have significant ridership, that have fairly high passenger loads at any one time, and we have others at certain times of the day or certain locations on routes have significant or have insignificant levels of ridership. And as an example, for routes 3A and 3B, providing service to Maple Ridge Apartments on VES Road, there is ridership back there, but that is not as heavy as the rest of the route. And that is something that the board and staff have been looking at for possibly using a small microtransit zone back there to allow for the buses to stay on Boonesboro Road, have more frequent service through there, and then take us off of those smaller back roads, but still provide that level of service. That requires a reconfiguration of how we do things. And so once again, that also means that that is going to have some adjustments to how we track our metrics, how things perform for us, as well as how we spend funds in the future. So.
I echo some of Ms. Reed's comments. There are key areas where we differ, which is not a surprise to anyone, but I think that the communication aspect is huge. And I totally agree that communication is something that we've really got to fix when it comes to department head access and council's role as being the policymakers and having that aspect of oversight. And that is my primary concern, both here and in the overall budget process, because there is a bottleneck in the communication where we do not have direct access to this information. We do not have direct access to department heads anymore when it comes to the budget process. That has been changed, that has been inverted, that has been altered. And so now we are having these meetings on the back end where decisions are having to be made where the needs of the department heads are not being presented clearly as the needs of the department heads. They have been pre-negotiated, if you will, in the way that it comes before council in the proposed budget. And I appreciate Dr. Wilder's sentiment that when the funds go down, it goes down all around. But really what this comes down to is a matter of priorities. And that is council's decision. That is council's purview. It is our purview as policymakers to determine what the priorities are in the overall context of the budget. But if we do not have budgets based on need versus predetermined and pre-negotiated budgets, we are not able to bear the burden of our role as policymakers in those decisions. And so then what happens is discretionary funds are applied on the back end and the spending drives the policy rather than the policy of the policymakers determine the spending. And I believe that's what we're seeing in this case with GLTC. I would also love to know the PDC meeting when GLTC was going to come. You all are welcome anytime. As the chair, I would love to have you. I'm not sure the date that Ms. Reed was referring to. I think she said April 5th, but I could be wrong. That was Easter. So we did not have a PDC meeting on April 5th, but whatever it was, I don't know, but we would love to have you at PDC. And this is my overall concern in the context of the budget process. So I agree with the communication concern, but I think the budget process needs to be looked at, and I want to make sure that our service is provided and we protect the 501-221 corridor. Thank you.
Mr. Ferrari.
Thank you all. And trying to find the best way to say this. So I don't see the point of today's meeting. I'm struggling to find what the objective is. That's not intended to offend. If it does, I own that and I apologize for it. It's not intended to offend. It's more, why are we here? What are we doing? What's the point? What's the objective? I can tell you from my seat, it was not to make public comments from the rookies on the council about how a budget should or should not work, Mayor. This is my 7th budget. And all we've heard about is, oh, we don't have access and we don't have this and we don't have that. Mayor, that's discrediting everything that's been provided to us. Oh, it's been pre-negotiated between the manager and his staff. Yeah, have you been to a business meeting before? Are they singing off the same sheet of music? This is not the venue to take your complaints out about how the budget process works or not. It's supposed to be about something related to GLTC and City Council. Now, I'm struggling to see what that is, and again, I don't intend that to be a slight. It's more just, what are we trying to do right now? And so if we want to make it about budget and GLTC, it's my understanding from what I've heard, has your budget gone down overall in the last number of years?
Total dollar spend, our budget has gone up slightly, and that's mainly due to inflationary pressures.
You had mentioned, I'll come back to that. What is the proposal from the proposed fiscal 2027 budget for you all?
Actually, Mr. Frawley, that's a good point for us probably to go into our presentation, because the board does have a couple of action items that we would like to take from this meeting in discussing our request, what we're looking at in budget, and then how we want to look at taking some of these grants for the next couple of years, because that is going to impact what we do not only for this year, but also for years in the future. And so we do actually would like to bring those up before this group and get an idea of that. So
I know I made some comments that might have ruffled some feathers, so I would certainly welcome a response, but I'm comfortable moving to that next phase because I do see that as at least something that we can bring some cohesion to.
Communication. I don't think Ms. Donna have a problem communicating with Josh. I don't think that's a problem. You all don't have that problem, do you?
No.
So department heads talk to one another. So when we take things and try to make it pit each other against one another, that's not constructive for none of us. Mr. Josh, you want to make your presentation? Marty?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Is the mic working? The mic is working. So a couple things before we jump into the presentation. I just want to either you can answer to them or table them to provide answers later. But the first one is in our budget retreat, staff had mentioned something about Liberty's on-campus enrollment increasing to 30,000, I think. So I'd like to know how would that impact our transit system if that were to happen, and also get more information on where that came from. The second thing is fuel cost. Right now, fuel is, especially diesel, is far more expensive than it was when you guys proposed your budget. What does that look like right now? What are you looking at with fuel costs on that? And then the multimodal plan, there's 500,000 that has been set aside in the proposed budget for the multimodal plan. I'd like to hear from you all from GLTC on, and Josh, you probably be able to speak to this best because you're also on CVTPO, the Transportation Policy Organization Board with me. And how does that overlap with what CVTPO is already doing? And is that really even necessary from a GLTC perspective? And then the final thing is if I could just get a walkthrough on what has changed with the CIP from last year's adopted budget, because we had planned for FY27, I guess, 1.7 million in appropriations by activity and 4.2 million in the expenditure cash flows. But what has been proposed is now 1.2 million in planned proposed appropriations for 27, and then nearly 7 million in the cash flows for 27. And really the reason that question comes up is because if you look at it between what was planned last year for FY27 and what's been proposed this year for FY27, the pay-as-you-go funding has doubled. So I'd like to know what drove those changes in the CIP from what we had planned on last year for this fiscal year and what's been proposed, because if you look at last year's budget and you look at this year's budget, the pay-as-you-go, the cash has essentially doubled from what was earmarked in there last year. So those are the four things that I've got.
Project.
public transit improvements and bus replacements.
Mr. Missions, for the first three, I think they're going to actually be answered to your satisfaction in the presentation, so I'll table them to then, and if not, we can do them. And I'll just mention for the capital improvement plan, so one of the reasons you see that number seems to be a large number move is unlike a lot of city departments that typically have a capital program that is only in this current fiscal year, buses right now are running an 18 to 24 month lead time. And so this money actually was awarded originally in 2021. And so part of that is we actually anticipated when this order was placed, delivery of the buses in this current fiscal year. Now they are not going to be delivered until most likely in the August timeframe, so that we'll put them in next fiscal year. So that's one of the reasons that, particularly on GLTC side, you'll see numbers shift along. Vehicle deliveries are at best a gamble right now. Timelines for delivery of vehicles has been all over the place. We have one body on chassis vehicle, the ones that we use for our paratransit, that has been on order for over a year and a half. It came in this week, along with 3 that we ordered 4 months ago. So it's like, really, why is there the delay here? And so that's one of the reasons that you see some of that from us, and trying to work with Donna and figure out what we're doing for cash flow each year so that they can plan for cash flow is always a weird target for us because so many things are hit or miss.
Well, and if you look at that page as well, the majority of that funding is not local.
Yes.
It's federal and state funding. So
The pay-as-you-go doubling, but I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you planned on delivery in the current fiscal year, which means the pay-go funding that you had set aside for that for last year, I guess to match whatever the state and federal may have been, would then return to fund balance and then go back in there for pay-as-you-go.
it doesn't return to fund balance because it's a capital fund. It just stays in the project, but that's why your cash flow changes.
Got it.
It's when they actually think they'll spend that money. So
Okay.
it may have been appropriated in a previous fiscal year, but they're not going to spend it until they actually have the buses.
And actually for these buses, when Donna was referring to us like putting in this large order, we originally were awarded this set of funds, and it was originally for 21 buses in 2021. And we partially split the order because that would have been a very big lift for all of us to have what was originally 21 buses and then went to 19 buses because of increasing costs. And now we're going to get 15 out of the total order. And that's just where costs have done. But originally trying to do all of that at one time would have been a very heavy lift for all of us. And that's one thing we've tried to do as well, is to space some of this capital funding out, because for just multiple different reasons, we have ended up getting capital funding, especially for vehicles in lumps. We got a large set many years ago in ARA funds. And the problem is that then everything wears out at the same time. And then we get it back into this requiring a large, basically hump to do funding, which is not good for either of us, because it just makes it hard to get funding, because it always seems like it happens when funds are tight. It's never when we've got plenty of money. So, but to answer your other question, sir, I think that'll answer in this presentation.
Thank you.
To answer some of the questions that have been said, is like why this meeting is needed. We are a quasi department of the city. We are not part of the city in the traditional sense. So our employees aren't in the VRS. They're not on the health insurance. We have to be competitive in our pay. There are constraints that we have no control over, gas being one of them. And when there are statements made that like Liberty is going to nearly double their in-person enrollment, well, the infrastructure of the city has to be able to maintain that increase in traffic. And so we want to make sure that we have a bus system that can meet those needs in our community. And I mean, transit isn't just an idea for us. It is how our neighbors get to doctor's appointments. It's how people get to work. It's how they get involved into the community. And it's how some of our board members got to this meeting today. And so it's, you know, we're all on the same team here, and we all of our brains work differently. We all process information differently. But one of the things that I think has been very clear in this discussion is both the city and GLTC staff are working tirelessly to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the community. And with that said, GLTC is constantly looking at ways to improve service and to be physically responsible with what we have to do. And so, I mean, in 2021, FY21, a transit plan is in progress to determine the effectiveness and efficiency of GLTC routes. We're currently in a multimodal plan now. There are, as well as the 12th Street Corridor plan. And, you know, these plans, when we do them, there are funding opportunities and grant opportunities. And we want to make sure that the funds to GLTC, that we can stretch those dollars, because about for every dollar the city puts, it's about $4 we get in return. So just, you know, kind of, I think, being mindful of that as we look at the presentation that kind of shows some of the challenges. And I hope that moving forward, this isn't just the only meeting we have. I would like to see it like the school board does, and we meet annually to make sure that the direction the city's going, that GLTC can help support that through the transit that we are providing, and that we are continuing to be good partners to each other, and most importantly, for the community we're serving. Thank you.
Mr. Josh, presentation, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So we've just got a couple of slides, and then are going to elaborate on a couple of things here on the presentation, and then come with what the board is looking at, getting some direction from council on. So the challenges that we're facing, and we've already talked through a lot of these, but insurance costs, health insurance, but also to a slight degree, vehicle liability insurance are increasing costs, as well as vehicle replacement costs. The cost to purchase a bus has, in essence, gone up 25% in the last year, and that is something that we really can't avoid if we want a new vehicle. Other vehicles have also experienced that to a degree, but buses are a big one because that's what we've got a large order for. Vehicle parts have longer lead times. That impacts us a couple of ways. In the past, we were able to purchase stuff using the Toyota method, which was basically just-in-time purchases. We could usually order something and get it the same day or get it the next day. Just here recently, filters have become hard to get out of a sort of odd thing, and some of that's due to some changes in the supply chains. Some of that is due to First Brands bankruptcy, if you're familiar with them. So there's all of these other little things that are happening that constantly are requiring us to adjust. We have a lot of grant-dependent funding, so we utilize our local match fully to meet our federal and our state grants. We also are fairly aggressive in applying for grants, and that's everything from operating grants to if we're doing a technical assistance grant, which is typically a study. We have gotten the state to fund those at 100%. We typically can get the state to fund those at 50%. It's just something that we have to think about and apply for when that time comes. 5307, which is a federal funding system, that is how we pay for the majority of our federal funds. The problem with 5307 is that we have experienced a bit of a dip in what we get formula-wise over the last few years due to the loss of liberty. During COVID, we were able to store a lot of those funds, so we've been able to weather some of that. And as our metrics have gone up, ridership has gone up, we have experienced increases in those grants. The problem with utilizing federal 5307 funds for grants are that they are reimbursement based. So when we spend the money, it's typically a month and a half after that before we get paid. And so that causes some cash flow concerns for us sometimes. The other part is this current fiscal year, we put in an application July 5th. The federal government, their fiscal year starts October 1st, but the applications weren't processed until mid-December. And so that meant during that entire time, we had no access to our federal funds. And so that is one thing where the city did advance us the quarterly payments early, because with federal funds making up about 48% of the budget, that's just not something that we're able to easily fill that hole with if those funds are not there. And unfortunately, I think that just as the federal government's changed, there are sometimes more delays. This coming year, there will need to be a new surface authorization bill, which funds transit. And so that's going to work into the delays as well. We've talked a little bit about cash flow, so I'm not going to really hit on that one too much. And then one of the things is that the board feels we're being a little bit more reactive in planning. We'd like to be a little bit more proactive in having some conversations about longer term funding and where we want to be going for in the future, because that allows us to position well for grants and other opportunities as they come forward. A couple of major risk areas for us. Wages. Wages are our single largest expense. We are a capital heavy service organization, so we have a lot of capital assets, but our service is provided by employees. And so wages are something that we have to look at because, as everybody has heard, CDL operators are in very short supply in both Virginia as well as nationwide. And that's something that we have to make sure that we're staying on par with. Health insurance, we've talked a little bit about that. Fuel and parts, to Mr. Mischin's comments, we are seeing that really starting in this past month's financials, because really in the last month we've had a sea change in fuel costs, and we typically leave ourselves some room for that, but we were also hoping to keep those costs low to continue to give us just a little bit more breathing room. The other thing is that while we tend to think of diesel and gasoline costs, this also impacts our fuels that go into our other vehicles. It also impacts other fluids such as transmission, oils, things like that, DEF to a degree. And so all of those have additional costs. And honestly, one of the places that we've seen the cost hit the fastest is shipping cost, because everybody has been very quick to ladle a shipping charge onto everything this time. And so getting parts has now comes with a 5 or 8% additional charge just to get those shipped. And then general inflation sort of on everything else. IT things have software hosted services have had inflation over the last couple of years. I think it's no surprise to everybody here that things just cost more than they did. And so that squeezes us as well. A little bit about just some of our other agencies. Charlottesville, they're really looking at doing something kind of different with transit than Roanoke. They're looking at scaling back a little bit because they're having issues with operators. And so that's part of what we want to talk about today is just where do we want to fall in with this coming range. So to Mr. Feraldi's point, one of the primary things that we would like to have a discussion with council and get some input on is our TRIP funding grant. So TRIP is a statewide funding program. GLTC has been very successful in applying for this. We utilize it for a number of capital expenditures. So new shelters, seating that's going out, a few other security upgrades. Those have all been funded by TRIP. We also currently use it to pay for our police officers. that are City of Lynchburg police officers that spend time at our transit center. So that is funded by TRIP. But what we have now is for our microtransit service, that originally was service that we had provided for many years for our Route 6 and 7 buses, but post-COVID, their ridership just didn't really recover. They were very much focused on J.Crew and StarTech, and those call centers never came back. So the ridership there wasn't as great as it could be. They're much more suburban areas, a lot of places where it's harder to get a bus. So the state actually commissioned a study and paid for it 100% for microtransit on us replacing fixed routes with microtransit. We actually did that. We were successful in getting 2 years of demonstration grant funding, which reduced, once again, the local costs because that was 80% funded by the state. And then that program ends this year. So we applied for funding this year. When we had transmitted this budget, we weren't sure that we would get this grant. We have since found out that we are tentatively awarded this grant. And I say tentatively because ultimately the Commonwealth Transportation Board has to vote in June to give final say, but that we have been awarded this grant. Now, if you look at it here, you'll see that this grant is what's referred to as a step-down grant. So we would get 80% funding in the first year, but then it's going to drop to 60% and then on down. So what that means is that while this year the costs are going to be roughly the same to us to operate this, each year going forward, it would require a larger local match to keep this service up. And this grant also is indexed for 3% inflation, so it's not a lot, but it does grow each year. But this is one of the things that the board would like to have a conversation with is, if we accept this grant, there is a 5-year commitment to it. And we do know that going into it, it is going to require additional funds each year to meet the requirements of the grant. And so that's one of the things that we want to know. Is this something that we want to pursue, or is there a concern that we may not have those grant funds in the future, in which case it may be better not to accept this grant because then that is not going to require us to be bound by the terms of the grant. So looking at the next slide, that gives a little bit additional detail. These are all current operations grants that we have. So once again, we have a currently existing grant for our Route 4, a third Route 4 bus, which is our heaviest ridership bus. It serves Wards Road, the Wards Road shopping centers, and Liberty University, as well as our demonstration grants for microtransit, our security officer grant, as well as an intern grant we have. And then kind of looking at finally, here's another piece for you, Mr. Mistrins. So we have a couple of studies ongoing, both between ourselves and the Planning District Commission. And so these are something that, if there is a wish to do a study, we or CVPDC can look at approaching either DRPT or some of the other funding sources to once again mitigate that. We're currently in the midst of updating our transit strategic plan. That's a required midlife update for that. However, since our plan was originally a prototype for the state and completed just prior to COVID, there's actually been some talk about the state being willing to pay for an early update because everything changed post-COVID. So there are some things that we could possibly work in once again to reduce cost. However, all of these have year-long lead times to come up with applying for some of these. So we have a little bit about just some of for those of you that aren't aware, we're partnered in with the city in multiple different places in a number of housing goals and other places. So this is just pulling some of that information in on the 12th Street corridor, the 501-221 interchange, as well as in the comprehensive plan and in the city's fair housing plans. And then for those of you that like numbers, we just have a few data points. 68% of our customers are going to work. and that is the primary usage for our system. After that, it is people that are shopping and then doing other things, going for entertainment and elsewise. But the vast majority of our customer trips are people going to work. And then for paratransit, this is probably not surprising, but 49% of those trips are people that are going for medical trips. We have a little bit about some of the things that we do. We're very proud to be partners with the city, once again, especially with the fire department, the police department, for some of their training, as well as for providing shuttle services to the city when the elevator is down, and some of the other things that we have done for voting, as well as our weather days when we have severe weather, whether it's hot or cold. So at that point, we do have some additional budget scenarios in there talking about what things would look like for some pieces, but I would like to go back to this slide, because I think this is going to determine what we look at going forward about operational costs. So is whether applying or accepting these multi-year step-down grants or something that GLTC should do, with the knowledge that this is going to require an additional local match each year to meet the grant requirements, or if it's something that we should not do if there's some uncertainty about it. So I guess, Mr. Mayor, I'd open it up if anybody had any questions.
Mr. Wilder?
Yes, thank you for the information. I appreciate that. What is the city's response to his question there? So like, it'd be a finance discussion.
If the city, after 5 years, wanted to fully support the cost of the new service at $800,000. If the city wanted to support the new cost of a service at $800,000, then we should potentially look at applying for the grant. But if it is a new service, and after 5 years, there's not a commitment from the city to invest, $800,000 in that new service, then I think we've got to think very carefully about whether or not it's a good idea.
Thank you. Other question I had in reference to the, I think the first or second, you mentioned your slide, is reference to the 25% of tariffs. What is that for? Is that for the cost of buses? What is that for all your expenses?
So that 25% cost is referencing just buses, because our bus manufacturer did actually itemize the tariff costs for the components. But we are seeing increased costs elsewhere, and whether that's tariffs or just increased costs, we are seeing increased costs in parts.
So are you saying that they're passing on the cost of the tariffs to GLTC?
Correct.
Okay. Wow.
So for buses, we can show you a line item that has the tariff costs. So,
wow. Okay. My goodness gracious. Amazing.
So
we're paying the tariffs cost.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Anyone else? Ms. Timmer?
Nothing at the moment. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
If I could speak to talking about the trip. So this trip grant is for existing service. This is the service that we already have running. So it would just, it's a additional funding stream that would be a single set of 5 years that would fund for this. And then after that, it would not be eligible for either demonstration funding or additional trip funding.
Mr. Ferrari?
Can you say that normally?
So the funding that we're looking at right here would continue to fund existing routes, and then have a step down each year. So the local costs will increase each year. but this is existing service that we currently have.
Starting at 800,000?
That is, yeah, it's costing us about $785,000 a year currently.
I'm going to be frank.
Hmm?
This is why we have the manager and his team get with your team to hash these details out ahead of time. So that way we're not trying to figure this out on 2 o'clock in the afternoon when most of us are working. So you're saying you have 750,000 that is already going to this, or you need another 750?
Currently, the state is funding 780,000 of this.
Another 800.
No, this would be, this is replacing that existing state grant funding.
Why would we replace it if the 700,000 is coming from the state?
It ends this year.
Okay. So we would backfill that $700,000 on existing service over a 3-year period?
No,
So if
so it would add, so if we were to take this grant, then you would look, we would get basically that same amount that we're getting this year in state funding for FY27. In FY28, it would be 60% of that amount. And then it diminishes downward. So
total dollar amount over the year of this that you would be asking? And I know I could look at it, but I'm already confused, so I want the number.
So the total local match is $2,382,701, of which the state will also be contributing $1,519,514 for a total 5-year cost of $3,902,215.
You said the state's ending. When does it end?
So that is we have a different grant program that is ending this year. So this
So there's
is,
another program outside of TRIP that's doing that?
yes. So
Respectfully, I want Josh to answer these questions. Thank you.
the current year, we have what's called a demonstration grant. It is a grant that's given to, that we were successful in getting. So the ask is we've heard that, that the pleasure would be that we not take this because it's diminishing funding, that either the contribution from the city incorporate this now and not include the state funding, or that we simply cut this service out. So the question is, what would be council's preference? Whether to utilize state
And what
fund-
happens, forgive me, I'm sorry, go ahead.
whether to utilize state funding to reduce the local match costs, or whether to fully fund this out of local funds and let the state have their money back,
Or you cut the service.
or cut the service.
So if I understand correctly, and please tell me if I misunderstand, once that grant is gone, if you want to continue the service, the liability is 100% on us because the grant is gone.
Yes.
Okay.
And the other,
What route is it?
it is our flex services. So it's the microtransit service that we operate in the Timberlake corridor, Nationwide Drive, those areas, the microtransit on-demand service. The other point is that state funds count as local match. So this will reduce the federal dollars that we can pull by the amount of the state match.
But once the grant is out, what happens to that ratio with the Fed?
That will go down then as well, but,
Okay.
and that goes down each year. So
But we're still pouring in from the local more.
yes, you would,
All right.
you would still be putting in more.
So out of all the services you offer, what percent of these microtransaction routes make up your metric to show where your business is?
So microtransit makes up, as far as ridership, it makes up about, excuse me, I'm doing some math here. Makes up about 15% of the monthly ridership.
And what percent, and I know your budget is funky, what percent of your budget reflects the rest of the service that drives the bulk of your return?
So that's federal, that federal make
Budget.
total budget. So total budget
So
outside of this
if I may
would be-
interject, forgive me.
Mhm.
If this represents 15%, where is the heart of what GLTC does, the bulk, and what dollar figure reflects that? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. So 22% of GLTC's ridership is on the Route 4, which is currently still has 2 years of a trip grant left on it. And it's 3 buses. So you're looking at roughly about 1.3 million. And I would have to, if you want a hard number, I'll have to do some budgeting
That's
to get
close
you
enough.
that. But yes, our one route carries about 22% of our total ridership.
Do you have off the top of your head, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, do you have off the top of your head, like with the next 1 or 2, like the top 3 routes that drive this?
It's going to be Route 4, Route 2, Route 8, and Route 12. So
Now I know this is going to be a guess. If you were to guess with all of those added together, if Route 4 is 22%, put all that together, what's the result?
those are about 60% of our ridership.
All right. Here's my point in asking this, and this is why, for me, these meetings are very difficult. What's the ask? What do you need? Let's get to the next thing. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If 60% of the ridership is dictated by these routes, what I've learned in my book of business is you focus on the things that warrant you earning the most. I know that's different with a government agency, but I'm sure the mayor can attest to that. You focus on the things that drive the numbers, the highest and best use. If the concept here is to say that, and I didn't write it down, that we're going to put this much emphasis on 15% of the use, it's a hard no for me. And I'm looking solely on the dollars. I'm not looking at the people. I'm not looking at the jobs. I'm not looking at the healthcare. This is solely on the money. Now, if you were to take a step back, it's like, well, who is this serving and what are the communities? That's a different conversation. But on the money, in a 5-year period, our real estate penny is going to surpass $1 million. You're talking about 4 pennies on the dollar for 15% of the service, which you're saying the ridership is increasing, but I'm not seeing it. Thank you all for allowing me to have that exercise, but that's where my brain goes when I'm hearing, all right, we have but this is what we want to focus on. Well, great. That's my reaction. And to our very lovely friends in the media, it is a reaction, and I want to pat Josh on the back. Thank you. I know you're guesstimating, you're putting those numbers, they're not official, but they're pretty darn enough for the conversation.
Yeah.
I see an issue with putting this much investment into something that is 15%. If we were to talk about, hey, we see the highest and best use on routes 4, 3, and 2, and we need extra dollars to serve there, that's a different conversation because that's clearly approximately 60% of where your use is. That's all my point.
And I just want to add that this is a conversation that always comes up in transit. It's a conversation called ridership versus coverage. And it's, if you had infinite money, you can do both. You can serve every single person and have a system that's designed for very high ridership. But we don't have infinite money. And so this is usually a sliding scale. And so part of the conversation here is where does council want to see the GLTC board set that scale? And then the board can make decisions based on where we're looking at in the future. Do we want to prioritize our highest ridership routes and building those out? Because that honestly looks different than if we're looking at maximum coverage, because that is designed for, the systems are kind of 2 totally different systems. Right now, we're a little bit to the right on the ridership side of the scale, so it's about 60-40. So to your point, Mr. Feraldi, is yes, we kind of have to determine where we want to go in the future and where we want to invest those dollars.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we're talking specifically about flex with this, correct? One of the things that I've got a question about, because when I look at the general fund GLTC part of our budget, it shows fares for fixed route and fares for paratransit service. Do we know what the fares look like for flex? Is that included in the fixed route? Is that?
It is included in the fixed route. Because our customers typically use multi-period passes, day pass, a weekly pass, multi-pass, it's a little bit hard to separate those exactly into which are which.
Because I'm looking at the board retreat, and I appreciate the invite to that we went to. I'm looking at the package, and one of the things that I'm noticing that I remembered, and I just pulled it back up, what you said in the board retreat was that the flex routes are $25 cheaper to operate on a per hour basis than a fixed route. So I guess the other question is, if that's a cheaper alternative as far as the cost to do it, why are we not looking at more of that? And it also doesn't require the CDLs, which are something that's not in demand. So I guess one of the things that kind of I'm wrapping my head around with this, I see the TRIP grant is to preserve flex, but is there any opportunities to replace any other routes with flex? Is that something that would be more cost effective based on the numbers that you provided and based on the fact that you don't have the scarcity with the need for CDL drivers?
The board has actually looked at that. We do have some plans to look at increasing some of our microtransit offerings. The thing that we have to watch with microtransit is that because the vehicles have a lower capacity, we had 2 fixed route buses in that area. We're using 3 to 4 vans to provide the service. Now we're transporting 3 times as many people, but the thing that we have to balance is we're using more vehicles and more operators because we don't have that scalability of size. So it's something that we have to balance very carefully. But the board does actually want to look at using flex, like we talked about previously, to service low demand areas, to add some service to places that we serve with a bus, but it maybe doesn't make sense in the future. And so that's one of the things that we actually have on the plans for the future, is looking at where we can trim some of this stuff down.
Would it take something like this TRIP grant continuing with flex to be able to then determine down the road? I'm just asking this question because if we say no, we don't want you to take the grant, and we say no, we don't want you to just kill the service because we're not going to pay for it, right? So if those are two of the options, right? Just discontinue it. Would you be able to figure out with us killing off flex if you'd be able to start replacing some of those routes? I guess the question I have is, when I look at this, I see FY27, a local match of 147,000, and then that increases by 600,000 at the end of the grant period, right? Is there a possibility that in that period you could essentially, like if we said, hey, look, this is it, but you guys are going to have to figure out how to absorb that increase year after year? Would that be something, I guess, incentivizes you to start looking at how you can start replacing those places where it doesn't make sense using a bus with flex? And is there a possibility down the road that that could kind of get closer to leveling out? You understand what I'm saying? Is that? I articulated to you.
Yeah, so I mean, that is one of the things, and that is actually what we did originally with this flex requirement. We actually reduced the fixed route buses, and we're able to kind of keep some of those costs flat by rolling those savings in. It's just one of the things that this would change would be the capital requirements that we have will change because the smaller vans just wear out faster. So that's going to look different. You're going to see more of those coming in. And it would also change just how we operate some of our routes, some of our metrics. Flex service by its nature is not scheduled. And so some customers aren't as happy with that because you don't have that certainty that we're going to show up at X time because this is the schedule. And so we've been lucky in that we've tried to work with some of the large employers in that area to give our riders a little bit of leeway if they can't get a trip booked immediately on the van. So that's, to your point, yes, we can make that change. And to Mr. Feraldi's point, we would not most likely kill the entirety of the flex service off if this wasn't taken. We will look at combining other stuff. We would make other changes to routes to par back and to make additional changes because there are some areas that we think that we could potentially have some savings. But one of the things is that, as everybody's aware, anytime we make changes, our customers, some people like our things to stay the same, some people don't. And so we always have a kind of process for that. And unfortunately, we're bound by some federal processes that just take a long time for us to be able to make service changes, which is one of the reasons we wanted to come to you now. It generally takes us about 90 to 120 days to make a service change, just due to the federal processes. So, in that aspect, we are an aircraft carrier and we can only turn so fast. But our intent is to be as nimble as possible.
Is there anyone else? Oh, Ms. Sprouse, you had something to say.
I think it's working now. I was just going to speak to, I think what Mr. Feraldi is feeling is something that I've experienced as a board member when I first came to GLTC. This is one of the most complicated funding strategies that I've ever been a part of, as well as all of the federal requirements, Title VI requirements and everything that the GLTC team has to function and operate under. It's just not black and white. And so for the most part, we would all put our money where the biggest bang is, but we also want to strategize in partnership with what's the city's goal for multimodal transit. And, that's part of their work with CVPDC, with DRPT. We are looking at this in collaboration with what the city needs. And sometimes it is not just ridership, it's coverage. Where do we need to coverage? Where is the city growing? Where are pockets that are really not accessible for, our patrons of the city? So really all of that becomes very complex. And it's really a strong desire of the board to really partner on how we do that the best for the people that we all serve.
Ms. Timmer.
Mr. Mayor, I first just want to thank you for the productiveness of this conversation and for Mr. Feraldi's points and Mr. Mishkin's points and how important this conversation is. The questions that I have are really kind of going back to the MOU, and I don't want to take away from this point if others want to speak directly to this at this point in time. My question has to do with the cash flow element and whether there's opportunity to revisit the MOU where there is a fund within GLTC that helps with some of those cash flow concerns as a possibility. I do not know if that would be resourceful to you all, but it's something that comes to mind in the context of this conversation. So I throw that out there. I have some additional thoughts, but I'll yield the floor for now. It's just a general.
Ms. Cameron.
Thank you, Mayor. It's on. Okay. So when we're looking at the system as a whole, the city, transit hits every single goal basically that the city has. So that's economic development, workforce participation, stable housing, quality of life. It's fundamental to the city. And when we're looking at the FY27, it is important to look beyond just FY27 because we want to ensure that the investments we're making in the city, throughout the city are actually accessible and that they're usable to the people we're trying to serve, because growth without access creates gaps that over time become harder and more expensive to close. And one of the things, take the Wigington Road development, for example. The city has incentives for development that increase density based on having things like a bus stop there. Well, we ran the figures when the development was first being discussed on Wigington, and there is not a fixed route out there. There wouldn't be unless we added another bus, which has its own substantial costs. And so that's where some of the looking at first mile, last mile comes into play of flex or micro transit. And there are a lot of acronyms. And so we do have a sheet if anybody needs one on our acronyms that we use, because that can be its own battle. But all that to say is that the heart behind, or the intent, as I read it, about the MOU is to help provide these safeguards for GLTC. Well, when GLTC every single year at the end of the fiscal year has to balance out at zero, it makes it very difficult. So the money that is on the city's books as GLTC reserves, that is something that we use for for capital, local match, for our fleet, for our buses. It's also for unforeseen cash flow shortfalls. But 100, bringing it down to 100,000, for example, is about 3.5 days of operating expenses. And so if something happens in FY28, we won't have funds dedicated in the city's budget or in GLTC's budget to offset those costs. And so what at least I'm trying to do as a board member is to make sure that the city and GLTC are on the same page with where transit's going, where developments are going, that we can be proactive with our service and that we are meeting those needs, but that we are also looking at this as a true partnership. And because we are not an official city department and our funding is convoluted, how that works. Thank you.
Just generally, thank you for the opportunity to opine or chime in a little bit here. My experience, just for what it's worth, coming from Hampton Roads, I was a member of Hampton Roads Transit, wherein we had 2 ferries, several buses, a light rail, and a myriad of other kind of rideshare components. And what we're talking about, that the piece that I proposed in the budget, the $500,000 that looks at, I know there's contemplative, however many studies that you saw up there. What happened in Norfolk was somewhat similar in that there was the fare box that kind of generated an expectation. And there, it was 7 or 6 different cities that were members of it, and there were 20 routes that were specific to Norfolk about which we wanted to understand what the return was. And the biggest component about driving where we were supposed to go next was also public input. So the element or aspect in what's being proposed here, again, want it to be complementary and or contemplative of already what you're doing, Josh, but also something about everyone's talking about here is this communication, right? Where we're headed, where we're growing, what we're doing. I looked at one of the studies, I think, and maybe there's been one since, but it was by Kimley Horn, 2019 to 2028. Was that?
That's our transit strategic plan, which we're currently.
Sorry.
That is our transit strategic plan, which we're currently doing a midlife update on.
Right. And as with anything, it's organic and growth and being what it is. So there's an element that may be a benefit about this question about an MOU and whether or not resources. I think that was what was contemplated in the proposal that I made to City Council, was to be something that augments or enhances further what you're doing. Because I know that the unintendeds, right, and the routes that we worked with in Norfolk, there are certain federal funds that have to go to them, and if they're not, if they're removed or taken away, then you can run into real trouble. So just as an element or aspect here, I think as we talk about partnerships, collaboration, communication, and candidly, that would be an element or aspect that I would foresee that as we move forward in that process, there'd be partners from both bodies that could work on that study together to get to a conclusion about where we're headed, what things look like, and what growth means, and how that impacts who GLTC could. Was it last year 150 years, or was it the year before?
So
Where are we? I thought we were celebrating a milestone here soon.
So we were formed October 6th, 1880, started service September 11th, 1881.
What's the math? I thought there was like
So last year would have been 150 years since our formation.
Let's go.
This year it'll be 150 years since we started operations.
Well, there we go. I knew I remembered that there was a milestone. So for what those were, just some feedback, some experience that I've had with it, and also just make sure that we recognize just how long we've been working with GLTC.
So,
Ms. Reed, and we're gonna have to make some decisions because we got another meeting here in a minute.
Yes, so thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to, in an effort to probably, help us wrap up and just to remind the citizens that are watching, and of course our partners here in the room, is, the city has a difficult job as a resource to our partners in the community. Is, we, just as we're about to have this meeting with the schools, when our partners come to us with requests, of course, we would love to be able to give everybody that comes to us with a request for additional funding what they want, because these are our citizens. Our citizens are riding the buses. Our citizens are going to the schools. They're all important to us. And so it's difficult for the city manager when coming up with the budget. It's difficult for us as council people to have to make the hard calls when we're trying to be responsible with the taxpayer dollars. We're trying to work with a budget. And so these are hard conversations, and anybody that's listening, nobody's trying to be the bad guy in the room, and nobody wants to have to say no. And so talking to GLTC, having to make the difficult decisions about, where the cuts have to be made, if they have to, or is the same conversation that we have every year about where we may have to make cuts. It's difficult. We don't want to, but just like in a household budget, sometimes you have to do it. You don't want to, but you have to. The costs are going up for all of us. We're all feeling it. The schools, same thing. It's difficult to have to make cuts somewhere, but you do. But we're all in it together, and we want to be supportive. And so, we're working together to do what's best for the citizens, and as community partners, hopefully we can come to some type of solution for y'all to move forward. But we appreciate the time today. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone else? Josh, closing statement?
I'd just like to thank everybody for sitting in with us. I know it's a lot of ground to cover in a short amount of time, and we're always open. If anybody has any questions or wants to know deeper about some of the stuff we talked about, feel free to reach out to us.
We will have to bring this back because, like you said, it's a lot deeper than what we can imagine. And we have to take care of our citizens. This meeting is adjourned. The next meeting is at 4 o'clock. Thank you all. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
welcome to the School Board City Council Joint Work Session. We thank for our city staff joining us this evening and all school board staff. Thank you all for coming out. We appreciate the partnership between our two bodies. When we come together like this, we strengthen and share our commitment to our students, our families, and the future of our community. Thank you all for being here. We look forward to a productive conversation. I'll turn you over to Ms. Majette for her budget presentation. Dr. Majette.
Good evening, everyone. If you bear with me. Oh, look, I did it. All right, so good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. Just thank you for the opportunity to present at the Lynchburg City Schools proposed operating budget for fiscal year 27. As you've already seen, I know the city manager has presented his proposed budget, and this presentation is intended to provide additional context behind our requests and the needs that are driving our budget proposal. So I do want you to look at it. It's more than a set of numbers, but it really reflects where we are as a division, the challenges that we are working through, and the steps that we're taking to move forward, but of course in a responsible way. So at the core, the budget is about our people, and you see our people here, and it's ensuring that our students have access to the support that they need, and the staff are in a position to consistently deliver them. So vision and direction, where are we headed? Our strategic plan is currently underway. That's something that we've been working very closely with a consulting firm, our community, staff, families, to get input as we develop what that 5-year roadmap looks like for us. And so we're in the process of doing that. But when you look at this, we had to develop a budget based on priorities. And typically you will develop the budget based on where you are with your strategic plan. But because we were in the process of developing the strategic plan, we just looked at overall priorities in terms of needs that came forward from buildings and then priorities from the school board. So some overall themes that came up was, of course, improving our academic outcomes, providing more support for our students, and then having a stable and supported workforce. So LCS at a glance. Looking at this just is a snapshot of our division. Pre-K through 12, we have approximately 7,700 students that are enrolled, approximately 1,400 employees across instruction, support, administrative roles. And looking at this, we see as the needs grow, the demands on our system and staff continues to increase. So meeting those needs requires resources beyond what's funded at the state level for us. So here I'm just giving a quick overview, and of course there'll be an opportunity to ask any questions when I get to the end. I'm not trying to rush through this, but I definitely want to hit the key highlights and then we can dissect it as a group. But here, when you think about how LCS is funded, our funding comes from state, local, and federal resources. And so while we serve over 7,700 kids, our student is based on an average daily membership, so that's an aggregate number of students. And there are certain groups like pre-K students, students who receive outside services that are pulled from that number. So what we receive is approximately money on about 7,000 students, not the 7,700. So the gap creates, it does create a gap between what we're funded and able to provide and the number of students that we actually do indeed. Index, I know the council has heard this probably many times, but that's the locality's ability to pay, and we're at a 0.39. That number itself is more of a, it's not a hard percentage, but that is something to take a look at. the floor of this is how many principals, this is how many teachers, this is how many counselors, instructional assistants, staff that you need at each level. We recognize with the needs, we work with people. So with the needs of people and young people, we can easily say, oh, you only need one media specialist, but we can recognize that we need more than one. And you can't, and in some cases you look at SOQs, if anybody wants some fun reading at any point, it'll say like a half a person, a 0.5. And it's like, how do we do that? So I think it's just some of those things that it drives the realities of our budget. Our enrollment exceeds our state funded projections, and and the local composite index reflects our ability to pay. And I said on the earlier slide, but it doesn't always reflect need. And so those factors do create gaps for us, and then that's where the locality comes in to support us. So I wanted to give you an overview. I'll go through each slide, but this just sort of gives you a broad overview of our recommended budget request. And I will go slide by slide, and it'll cover everything. That was what was in the last administration's budget. I know they're toying around with the 3%, and so things change. And so we'll probably continue to have those conversations with your city staff here. The increased base hourly rate to $20, a 2-year step increase for employees on the pay scale, and then reinstating the school board stipends. And you can see the amount behind each item. Administrative support, looking at advertising and recruitment support, particularly in the area of transportation. We need it across the board, but particularly in those areas, and whatever training and support that we can give there. Special education supervisors, as the need of our students grow, we need more highly skilled people in the areas of special education to provide those supports. Human resources compliance officer, they're just great needs in that area, as we are ensuring that we're following the policy as we should. Unfortunately, you have cases where there has to be a series of investigations, and we're pulling staff that needs to be working on recruitment and retention to do compliance investigations. And I can tell you from personal experience, they are lengthy investigations when you're the one who has to do it, because I've served in that role before. And then communications liaison stipend program, we were looking at having communications liaisons at each of the schools to help us with effectively communicating to families. That's one thing that we've heard, that we want greater communication, and we definitely need help there. Austin and his team do a wonderful job, but they can't do all communication for all of the different sites. We need support. Of course, academic success, expansion of an alternative education program. Looking at, we've already we haven't finalized, but we began looking at some various sites across the division where there's additional space, so we can maximize that space, and to have greater supports for students who may be facing some challenges that need an alternative setting, because they're still our students, but we have to make sure that we have a structured environment for those students to be in so that we can best serve them and also be able to serve the rest of our students as well. And so you see other things here: instructional support, increase in extra class period pay. We have a lot of teachers who are covering classes. Looking at middle school deans, and there would be a sort of a dean of students. What's happening is all 3 of our middle schools are federally identified. And with them being federally identified, that's just not being off track with the state. Now we have another identification with federally identified. And when you start looking at that, we need greater support, but it has to be greater support in classrooms. So we need principals, assistant principals in classrooms providing support to teachers, giving that quality feedback that teachers need, providing that support that's needed, and then looking at someone else to handle those disciplinary things that come up during those moments of the day. Because if principals and assistant principals are handling discipline all day, who's helping teachers and support kids with instruction? So we were looking at some additional structures there. Really expanding early childhood. So a student support specialist. Right now, our principals at our early childhood centers serve dual roles. And then, of course, some purchase services for special ed, and increase in some private transportation services that we're required to do. And then overall with operations, looking at grounds equipment replacement that we desperately need. We needed some replacements, and then of course we got Snowmageddon for about 10 days, and some of our equipment
wasn't able to withstand that. We're really thankful to the city staff for supporting us through that long 7 to 10 days. It felt like forever. School nutrition equipment upgrades, looking at some additional building maintenance supplies for our alternative ed expansion. And of course, as always, is a liability insurance increase. So in looking at this, and this just gives you a snapshot, fiscal year 26, that's the fiscal year we're in. Expenditures is what you're spending, what's going out. And so you see all of the categories there from instruction, operations, technology. And our fiscal year 26 adopted was 119 million. And our proposed for fiscal year 27 is 127 million. Same with revenues. You look there between fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. Your revenues and expenditures always need to match. If anything, revenues can exceed expenditures, but you definitely don't want expenditures to exceed revenues. So our request to the city, $4,531,015 in increase in the local request from there. And from there, we were looking at how do we align these resources? Because we have to be good stewards of anything that you give us, of the funding that you give us. So we want to make sure that those investments support our student growth and achievement, that we're supporting staff retention, compliance, and building capacity, meaning how do we pour into staff so that people are appropriately licensed and have the support that they need to be highly qualified teachers in our classrooms or staff. Those operational needs, as always, protect instructional time, and that goes back to looking at ensuring that we have proper maintenance equipment, that we can do things at different hours, that we can have deans of students so that we can protect that time in classrooms with kids and teachers versus handling 1 or 2 disciplinary issues. And then the request aligned to the division priorities and vision. And so that was my really brief, fast synopsis. I was told to keep it in line and keep it on time. And I am open. I will go to any slide and answer any questions that I feel is in my ability to do so. Thank you.
Anyone for discussion?
Am I on yet? Yes, no, there I am. Thank you. Okay. So I do have several questions. As you guys know, literacy is my platform, and I will stay on that platform as long as I need to till all our kids are reading. For those of you who don't know, the statistics for literacy are quite shocking nationwide. They're on the decline every year. Currently, the rate of, it says if child's not reading independently by 3rd grade, their risk for incarceration is now increased to 70%. 70%. So it's a battle we're really fighting for our kiddos that need to read. I mean, all children should be reading. So my question first is, with the money that's allocated for instruction and knowing that we're fighting the literacy crisis ourselves right here in Lynchburg, I'm going to kind of lay out my questions and then we can address them after I lay them out. What are our plans to address that crisis here? I didn't see anything about that part in the instructional piece of the budget. We have children in our high schools who are reading at a 2nd grade level. There's a direct correlation between literacy and behavioral problems. So when I know that we have our discipline committee who is overwhelmed when dealing with discipline problems every time they meet. And for those of you who don't know what's happening, and understand that what I'm saying, I'm not blaming our schools for, okay? This is not me blaming. We have incredible teachers who are overwhelmed. I love our teachers and I have such a respect for teachers, okay? So understand that too. But what's happening is when a child cannot read, and then they get passed to the next grade, just imagine for a minute if they're handed this paper in 4th grade and they can't read it, How are they expected to do the work in any subject? They're looking at a paper like I'm looking at a paper with Russian on it, and I can't speak Russian, I can't read Russian. I wouldn't know what it said. And then we're telling them, well, do history and do science and do every other subject, and they can't do it. So what's happening for those children is when they can't read and therefore understand, they start to eventually act out because they don't want to be called on and they don't want to be embarrassed in front of their friends, so they will do whatever it is they need to do to cover up for not being called on in front of their friends, and that starts the behavioral issues. Many times, not all the time, but many times. So that's part of it. Now, there are other children that act out for other reasons. It's not always correlated to literacy, but a lot of times it is. And then what happens is they get promoted to 5th grade, and then 6th grade, and then 7th grade. And they're not learning because they still can't read because we don't have reading teachers beyond elementary school. We don't have reading resource teachers. I think we have one maybe that's shared between the middle and high schools, unless that's changed since last year. So these children who can't read and then get promoted to middle school are just waiting to drop out because they can't read. And they don't have one-on-one help or private tutoring to help them read. So that's what ultimately, and they give up on themselves. And that's why you see me fight several years in a row for our legislative agenda for trying to get the state to somehow help us with this crisis, because it's that serious. And the kids don't want this for themselves. So that's why organizations like the Boys and Girls Club, Jubilee, others around the city have tried to partner with the schools in doing reading programs to try to help, alongside, which is what we're trying to do at the Boys and Girls Club, and I think Jubilee does as well, with after-school reading tutoring and working together to help give more one-on-one reading time with the kids. So it's really important to me to see that there is some investment being made in how we're aggressively going to address this reading crisis in grades K through 3. I would love us to have some type of I don't know, I'm trying to think of the word. 50-year-old brain is not a joke, but I'm thinking of it like a slogan. That's it, slogan. That is like, every child reading by 3rd grade, and that we make that our goal in Lynchburg, because it can be done. I know, Ms. Lauer, you're a reading teacher, so like they should be able to. And then what does that look like? How do we make that real for our kids? And then how are we going to address it in the higher grades so that our kids have a true chance at success and they aren't giving up on themselves? And I think we will then see an improvement in behavior naturally. I really do. So I'm curious so all that to say, what is the plan for addressing the literacy crisis in our own schools? Because we've got to do it here in instruction. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I feel like I made pretty good notes. I am going to have Dr. Davis to come up and explain exactly what our Virginia, our reading literacy plan is, because we are required by the state to do that, and that's under Virginia Literacy Act. But as she's coming up, I do want to touch on a few things. Absolutely appreciate the partnerships and things with the schools and with Boys and Girls Clubs and Jubilee and all of the other organizations. I'm not sure where you are. Oh, she has a microphone. We appreciate that. One of the things and I know that we're going to touch on at our board meeting next week, but I'll go ahead and share some pieces now. But looking at how we can best partner for those supports and those services when we start looking at reading and tutoring and having people come in, because there are certain guidelines that need to be followed. And the reading, it's not reflected in this budget because it's already in the current budget to address the reading with reading specialists and everyone. But I'll have Dr. Davis just sort of outline what our reading plan is.
So thank you very much. So I'll start with the literacy plan that's been adopted and approved, and that included the high quality instructional materials. So when you see a lot of that HQIM listed, want to make sure that everybody is aware that is what was meant by the state by high quality instructional materials. We did adopt that 2 years ago for elementary, and it does take time for some of that implementation, but we did adopt that K through 5 and started some literacy and math programs at the pre-K level coming into this year with going into hubs. So addressing that early literacy gap. As far as secondary, we also have HMH, which is our high quality instructional materials, and we do have reading specialists at the middle school. Now that was not, again, I wanted to make sure that I address that as well. We do have openings, an opening, but we do have positions and we carve those out specifically and intentionally. Yes, they're already in. They're at the middle schools, and our team does work diligently with those folks as well as far as PD that's offered throughout. So those plans are well laid. We are increasing the amount of professional development. A lot of that's been built into our OSQ improvement plans, and allowing the opportunity for our teachers to come in even throughout the summer, not just for the training, but planning and instructional guidance. So we're doing a lot of that work towards that literacy goal. So just because we may not see it, and it was such a big piece before where we were really doing the push for the literacy plan, it's there and it is thriving, and we have gotten very positive feedback about benchmark, and we're moving very well. We actually just got great feedback from a professional development in the middle of May for our secondary teachers, and they said it was one of the best professional development opportunities they had had in a very long time for literacy. One of the things I will address too, we went a very long time, and it was pre-COVID, so not just COVID, but pre-COVID, without having a centralized literacy program. So that's where we start to create gaps along the way. It's very important to ensure if I leave one school and go to the other, I'm going to receive that instruction, and it's going to be unified and consistent throughout those pieces as well. So just I wanted to allude to that, and we have been in schools. Actually, we were there. And we are taking a look all the way through for literacy and putting several things in place, as well as addressing that gap for literacy. When you talked about tutoring and after-school programming, our schools do have that up and available, so we can do some attendance recovery programs alongside closing that gap. Thank you.
Dr. Wilder.
Thank you for the information. I really appreciate it. If we can go back to the slide you had up there, as far as the budget request. So, go back to the other one. As far as the difference between what it was last year, what it is this year.
Oh, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, you had that. Yes, ma'am. So it was 119, and now this year is 127. It's an increase of 4.5 million. Is that? In local requests, I'm sorry.
Yes, in that local, yes, sir.
So as far as what the city has already proposed, how much difference is it now?
It's about, I think you proposed about 2.1, so probably maybe 2.4 difference,
So
$2.4 million.
So currently it's about 2.1 different. Now, we still don't know about the VRS, what that amount's gonna be.
Yes, sir. So the VRS savings looks like it's supposed to be about 1.7 million for the VRS savings. Our concern is until we get everything back with the new calc tool, we're hopeful that they'll leave things as is. But sometimes, and I'll just say in my experiences, you'll get something in one line and then they'll remove something in another. So we're not really sure what that's going to look like until we get that.
And without the addition, just so I can be clear, without the additional funding from the city, what is your plan B? Is there a plan B?
Well, I think there's always a plan B. We go back and we talk and we adjust. I mean, there's always a plan B. We still have to educate children. So, of course, we're going to come and say, this is what we need because this was a budget of need. But obviously, we recognize if you come back and say, this is all that you're getting and we've been here fighting for it, we have to adjust. I can't just stop educating children.
Yes, okay. From the city point, is there any additional funds possible or where's the city standpoint?
I propose the budget based on informed numbers as best I can, doing what I can with, there was talk about city priorities. I tried to make sure that those are met. This is the highest level of funding that council has proposed and outside funding for Lynchburg City Schools since since forever. And then also the additional investment of, the second year of a 3-year commitment in capital of 30 million more for Lynchburg City Schools. So we think it robust. We try to do our best with what we have. And obviously, being a dad that has my youngest there and now a daughter that teaches there, these are all things that come in, obviously outside of that. But, our schools, I think, Christy put it well about economic development and what it means, and we want the best schools and what those resources are. And to the degree able and the means that we have, I'm working with the staff and working with Christy about how best to get there. We've done what we can, but I understand well her side of it, which is there are other things, there are other needs, there are other resources, and so yes, sir, that's where we are.
Thank you. We continue to evaluate that. The other piece, getting back to what Councilman Reed asked about further reading, achievement, things of that nature, how does that also affect the achievement gap? Is it convoluted in that same discussion, or have the same kind of support service for that?
And I'll have to say this, when we start thinking about the achievement gap, when we look at our overall data, the majority of the students we serve are Black. So I will say that. As far as population and community is different, but the majority that we serve are Black, because I know that's been the conversation about the achievement gap piece. I'm here to serve all kids. So what I'm looking at is what do we need to do to set the foundational structures to serve everyone? I can't sit here and say that reading is the only thing that people see as the gap or what they perceive as the gap, but sometimes the achievement gap isn't just color or race. It can be economic gaps. There could be other disparities that are there, because I don't think we really have defined what that gap is at this point. So I can't sit here and say explicitly that it's necessarily reading or that it's math or what it is, because I think that a lot of the discussion about the gap, it hasn't been defined what the gap is. Like what the data is showing that there's a true gap and where it is, whether it's just on the lines of race or does economics play a factor in that? I don't know, as far as that. I think we just have to dive deeper as to what that is. But as far as the literacy crisis, I think that's the literacy crisis, and I know that we're talking about Lynchburg, but for the state to put in the Virginia Literacy Act, it's okay. I apologize. Okay. Okay. How about that? Okay. So as far as the just speaking about the achievement gap, I think at some point we have to define what are the parameters for that gap, because when we start saying that I think some of the messaging has been that it's race, but when the majority of our students are students that are Black, then it's sort of like, what gap are we looking at? Are we looking at, is it simply economics, or is that? So that's what I was saying there. But then literacy hasn't just been a problem for LCS. For the state to come in and say that we have to have a Virginia Literacy Act, the teaching of reading and the science of reading had not been there to that level. And like Dr. Davis had said, there was no uniformity, and not just in LCS, but several places. It takes, I know people hate hearing that it takes time, but if it took 20 years to get from 75-20, ranking 75 out of 131 school divisions 20 years ago, to get to 122 now at this point, I'm not saying it's going to take us 20 years to get where we need to be, but I think we have, because we don't have another 20 years. We can't lose kids, right? We can't lose kids. But ultimately, it's not going to be in the 9 months that I showed up. It's going to take time. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry.
Because the VDOE just released their participation data. There's different causes for achievement gap. One of them is student participation. Would you have, I know I'm putting you on spot, do you have that data? You want to share with public what the participation rate was in this publicly released report?
I would have to find it in my email real quick. Okay, I'll find it for you.
While she's working on it, just again, from my point is when you look at all like the SOL data and all the data, you see the breakdown by race, by gender, all that kind of things, and I'm always get questions from our community about what we do as a community to address those gaps there. So we refer more so to those testing store gaps that are breakdown by race, things of that nature. Like, for example, I know we work with the NWCP on the grant they receive and addressing how can we use those dollars. They got a small grant. How can we use those dollars to help effectively support our school system? So looking at some of those numbers as a community, as we look at those numbers, what we can do as a community to make sure we are addressing those. We got the community partners we need to be at the table to support our school system. Again, I know it's not just on our school system, it's a community situation and what we as a community can do to address and to be a part of the conversation.
Gotcha. Thank you, Dr. Wilder. I would say with that, that's one of the things that we were looking at because we have a lot of partners. We have a lot of partners. And I know one of our WISE board members would say we're resource rich and allocation poor. And that was one of the things that really stood out to me. And when I first got here and looking at that, we have a lot of resources, but how do we structure that? So one of the things that we are looking to do, we haven't put it out yet, but probably June 30th, because I've asked people, let me get through this year. We have a lot that we're cleaning up. It's a lot of minutia and it's unfortunate, but there are a lot of structures that were not in place. So you can't do it all, but we got to have a foundation to be able to do work. And so when people are saying, oh, I got to get in, I want to come in and tutor, and I love it. At the same time, we got to get some structures in place because if not, I'll have 30 people sitting at one school and you're just there and saying, hey, we're here to help children, but we don't have any structured plan. It has to be a process. And so we're looking for June 30th is going to be the date that we're going to be sending something out to anyone who wants to partner with us so that we can talk about where the needs are. We're going to do a needs assessment with each principal. What do you need for your building? Because sometimes people say, well, I want to go and tutor in this building. I want to go work in this building. Well, I can't send 40 people to RS Payne, but I may say, hey, could you help us out at Payne? Bass may need a few people. Could you help us? Could you go by Bedford Hills? You know, and being able to get a needs assessment from principals as to what do you need for your particular building, not only based on your data, your hard quantitative data, but qualitatively, you're looking at your kids and your needs. Some people just need a lunch buddy. They just need somebody to come by and care about them. So we are planning for that. I've been working closely with our community, family community coordinator, with Dr. Davis in her office, and Mr. Marshall in his office, because we've been looking at how do we go ahead and have a community meeting, and Mr. Poe as well, he gives me a lot of good insight. How do we have a community meeting and put structures in place for people to understand this is where we need some help. If you're planning to tutor or do something instructionally, we need you to go through this training. We have some buildings that could use a little bit of love. If somebody wants to come and do a beautification project, help us paint something this summer, help us plant some flowers. We have people with all types of gifts. I think sometimes we think that the only thing we can do is that part. And so we are planning a meeting for that. We've set the date. We just haven't gotten everything out yet that we can partner with everyone. But I will say for us is, in that meeting, I feel like will be the first of many because we need to have group partnership meetings on a regular basis and look at not only how we can help during the school day, but what supports we can get from the community to support families and to serve families before they transition to us would be of particular importance and help.
Thank you so much. I think that's so important. So I'm glad to hear that. So we can kind of put that in the community that the school system is working on that. The date is so far tentatively June the 30th, possibly, where we're going to see this is how the community can help. Because when you hear that the school system is whatever number it is versus other numbers, you know, that's alarming to our community. And we want to continue to attract people to our community to move to Lynchburg or stay in Lynchburg and educate their kids in the public school system, and how we as a community can work together and partner with our school system. That's not just on the school system or the school board, but it's all of us work together doing our part because they're all of our children. And we want to see our children all excel well. So however we can partner together, however we as a community come together and just roll up our sleeves and say, listen to our school system. This is what you need. This is how we can help. And putting all of the resources together. It's not all about the money. You know, we try to do what we can with the money piece and try to go there where we can. But what can our community do as well to support our school system and support those achievements and things of that nature, so we can be a stronger school system. And so you won't feel like it's all on us. But it's on you, but it's all on us as people, as citizens, that we have to bring our school system up. Because I've been on the city council for 10 years, and at some point, some people just want to put the blame all on our school board, all on our school superintendent. I've seen that blame continuously. But again, it's going to be working with all of us, working together to help achieve our kids to be at a place where we want our children to be. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
So on that note, Mr. Wilder, and all of you on City Council. I have a request because I'm not sure if it's a City Council or a Business Alliance, but one thing that would help is parents can always show up to conferences. Now, if businesses are told, hey, let them do a video, a Zoom or something, if you could pitch in and somehow get businesses on board to, at people's jobs, to allow them to do a Zoom or something when it's parent conference night and they can't get off of work, that would be helpful. So that's an ask. I'm not sure who to ask. I just thought it would be a good time to ask it.
There's a delay. I'll do what I can to work with you and with Christy about how best that can happen. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That might be the easiest ask we get all night, so thank you for that. And I think it's an important one. Just a couple things. One, I just kind of want to highlight from my own experience, because the questions about some of the literacy stuff, I'm in a unique situation having a second grader and a fourth grader in LCS right now. And I got to experience one of them going into benchmark midway through, which is the reading program. And my older child, it was tougher to get him to get with that program because he didn't experience the building blocks below it. So just keep that in mind. The foundation that's happening earlier now is preparing the kids that are, as they're getting older, but it's just more work with the kids that are older. So just wanted to point that out. One of the things that I noticed, and again, thank you all for being here, and I appreciate all the work that you've been doing, Dr. Summerall of the Jet, because the plane was flying and you got thrown in the pilot seat. And I know it's been quite a year, and I appreciate just everything that you all have done. Some of the differences that I've seen personally with the capital improvement efforts that Mr. Marshall has been spearheading in the back, just the responsiveness of you guys getting appropriations to fix things and actually following through on budget, on time, ahead of schedule is a breath of fresh air. So I just appreciate what you all have been doing with that. But looking at this, and I've just got some questions just based on conversations that I have with other parents, and obviously I'm a little close to the school system with my wife working there as a kindergarten teacher. I noticed there's a pretty significant investment in your ask. It looks like you've got about 700,000 allocated towards special education, and then another 530,000 allocated towards alternative ed. And I'm wondering, is this in a response to kind of making sure that we have the right environments in the classroom so that the kids that don't necessarily need that extra support with the behaviors or the special ed stuff, that we're going to be able to have a better learning environment for them? Is that what, that's the question that I have about that.
Yes, sir. That's what it lends itself to. The piece for special ed is having, of course, a better learning environment for students with disabilities and better supports. And then honestly, just full transparency, our new director of special ed is doing a phenomenal job. She's kind of been buried under some things, but for looking back in some of the past history, there have been several unfortunate, and this is all public stuff, you can go to DOE and find it, but essentially several compliance issues that we've had in the past with special ed, so in past years. So just making sure that we're in compliance, and we definitely need the other hands, we need the other support to make sure that we're best serving all the needs of kids with disabilities. As far as alternative education, we are finding, it's unfortunate, and I think it goes back to what Dr. Wild and I were just discussing in terms of getting that community support and what do we need to do beforehand to best support our students, because it's, these aren't bad children, they aren't bad people, they're just not making good decisions. And when you're not making good decisions when you're coming to school, then it impacts the environment for everybody else. And so ultimately, we have to make sure that kids are safe, we got to make sure the staff is safe, And there's several situations, unfortunately, it's been many, where we have to make sure that we have an alternate placement for those students because we still need to educate them, but we still need to educate them in a more controlled environment and supported environment to meet their needs, but also so that the teacher in that classroom and those kids that were in that classroom that may have been impacted by someone making a bad decision can continue with their learning from there. So just removing the distractions as far as if someone's having outbursts or there's something going on, just having an alternate setting. That's on the behavior end, if there's discipline. But I will say this, sometimes an alternative setting is just, it may be a student that has anxiety and he or she just needs to be somewhere else. Maybe being at the school with 1,100 students is too much, it's overwhelming. I'm not a behavioral problem, but hey, I'm a student that is just struggling there. But having space for an alternate setting for that child, that student to be able to go somewhere else. And so looking at that, we realized we needed to expand it under the system that the way that it's been in place when I arrived, it essentially was at certain touch points. So it was like if you were in 6th grade or 9th grade, you were able to go to Restorative Academy. But what happens if my behavior, and I get that it was set up for transition years, but if Fort Hill is full, we shouldn't send all these students home because it doesn't make sense for people to just be out here. You know, an idle mind is a devil's playground, right? So why would we have you just at home all day long and floating around in the community? Because what happens if I have time on my hands, what am I going to do? Am I going to pick up that book and read, or am I going to get into something I don't need to do, right? And so it's going to be B. And so we looked at how do we have our kids here and expand that space and look at different opportunities to be able to, maybe this environment didn't work for you, but now we need to educate you in another environment. So we're looking at that for now, and I know that our disciplined gentlemen have some other opportunities that they're exploring.
And I think, thank you for that. That's very helpful. And I think those are important areas that we gotta address. I'm hearing a lot, seeing it with my own eyes as well. But it's good to see that that's a focus when I look at this, because those, you know, when you look at the overall ask and the increase, including all the state funding, it's a pretty big chunk of it right there in just those 2 items. And I think that's something that needs to be noted. If I got something else, I'll let you know, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Poe.
Thank you. So that was some of the, I didn't really have a question, but I definitely wanted you to expound on the alternative education process. One of the things that at the end of this month that we'll be doing, a handful of us will be going to Charlottesville. They have an alternative program. They were having a lot of the same disciplinary issues that we're having here, and they have something called night school with K. And they've been able to do a wonderful job of turning around a lot of their disciplinary issues. So I think the fact that we're facing such issues, and you have a lot of newer administration coming in, as you use the term, the plane was already flying, you had to just kind of jump in. That's where we are as a school system. And so we're gonna have to be innovative in the different things that we're doing. And one of the things that they had to have was funding for their alternative program. And so I'm assuming that's where that chunk of money is for that planning, because I know sitting on the disciplinary committee, we run into that issue a lot of times where we just don't have places to put certain students that are struggling, and we shouldn't be in that situation. So trying to be innovative, figure out how we can move things around. There was also a mention about the achievement gap, and I wanted to circle back around. I really think it's going to take a community to wrap themselves around what's going on. It feels good to be able to sit amongst city council and the city, and I wanted to be clear that there are a lot of things going on behind the scenes, and it's hard to, a lot of people want a lot more transparency and communication. But, you know, when you're trying to put out fires, it's a little difficult, and you just want to make sure that you are setting things up and not get ahead of yourself as well. So there are definitely processes and different things that are going on behind the scenes, so we can actually be effective as possible, and definitely want the community to know that.
Non-delayed hearing. Thank you. So, Dr. Somerville-Majette, I just wanted to say, first of all, I think you know that I'm passionate for the kiddos. So if I come across strong, it's just because I am passionate, and most of y'all know that I just have a heart for our children, and I just believe in their success. And as you just said, these are good kids. You know, most of them just they're different struggles. Most of them haven't even chosen for their lives. It's just they're dealing with what the hand that they've been dealt, and doing their best. And I wanted to give a shout out to the Restorative Academy, because several of my kiddos have had to spend some time, or the kiddos at the club have had to spend some time there. And I have several employees that work there, and they're wonderful. They're wonderful and are so patient and so great. And a couple of the kids that we've had to spend some time there actually have seen their grades go up while being in there, and they bring their report cards in because they get rewards for having improvement in their grades, and we hang them on the wall. And they've been so proud, and it has been so great for them to have that boost of just that separation from whatever the problem was, going over to RA, having that time, and having the good teachers in there. And then they have brought us the report cards, and they're so happy, and that's just been so good for them. And then they go back to their classroom, and sometimes that's been challenging, because we realize that sometimes it's just the distraction of the setting has really been what it is. And so I just wanted to give a shout out again to our educators, to the program that's working, and to what it has done for just the self-esteem of some of the kids that have been in there. So well done.
How has it been working since no phones in the high schools? Is it working? No phones.
I think it works as well as it's being enforced. I think the enforcement is what matters. And when you say the high schools, as a former high school principal, the one thing that I've always learned is what you set up at the beginning is what will carry forward. So I think it works as well as it's enforced. We still, as always, there's still an understanding that many of these children, I think about when I graduated high school, I think there were cell phones, but we didn't have one. And I think it was like a car phone. Now, and you only had it if you had families who had money, so we didn't have one. But I think about now, you have a little kid with a cell phone, they walk around 2 years old with a phone in their hand. So it's always going to be difficulty. I don't think that anything is ever perfect, but I do think that we can have, with anything, implementation is what matters when you start looking at something like that, and how do you adhere to that policy and putting that in place.
That causes a learning curve too, phones. And also the vapes. How many of our kids walk in the hallway with vape pipes in their hands?
I can't say I've seen any walking around with vape pipes in their hands, but we do recognize, and those students that are caught with the vapes, they get to see our lovely discipline committee on Thursdays with that. And we put, I know it was one big thing for Mr. Connor, if you don't mind me saying, but he really impressed upon us, this is serious business. And so with the vapes and gummies and all those other things, and we actually put up a lot of signage, did a lot, just sort of a whole campaign about the vaping piece. Is anything 100% foolproof? No, it's not. But now with the level of consequences, is it really worth it? I do think on the, the access side, I think things are too accessible. Like I see smoke shops and vape shops and things like that, and I get that it stimulates economy because there are people going in and out all the time. But I wonder what those parameters are in terms of are people really checking, IDs? Are we really checking for some of those things? Or even, so I connected to even like helping community pieces and the family pieces and, having a level of responsibility as a parent of checking your child, are you doing something like that? Being aware of what's happening before we get to the school level, because I hate it for students in the sense that if somebody was more involved with me, maybe I wouldn't bring that to school and then end up going on a suspension. And then I've removed all my access away from my learning in that same vein. So no, I can't say I've seen a vape in hand walking around school, but obviously we've had issues with vapes because they've gone through the discipline committee. Yes, sir.
Hey, Mr. Byron?
If I can speak to that. Being on the disciplinary committee and doing the hearings week after week, those are two things we see every week, every single week. We're going to see something with a THC vape, and we're going to see something that started. Usually, you talk about fights, you talk about issues in the class, disruptions in the classroom. A lot of times it starts because of a cell phone issue. Even if it's not a cell phone at school, it's the way students are using cell phones and communicating outside of school that bleeds into the school system. It's really important. These are two things I think these are community issues. And we can say no cell phones and no vapes in the schools, but when kids go home, they have access to these things. They're addicted. They're addicted. There are a lot of adults that are addicted to these things. So I think it's really important that as a community, we take initiatives, not just in the school system, but around families and how do we hold vape shops accountable for who they distribute these devices to. Some of them they're getting online, and I don't know what we can do about that, but educating parents. I think it's pretty straightforward when you talk about educating parents on drug consumption with minors, but when we talk about cell phones, there's nothing more addictive than dopamine. And there's so much destructive power in that small device, and we don't understand that as parents. We don't monitor what our kids are consuming. We're going to continually see the problem. Now, I'm talking about, hey, these are ways we can address it as the school, but we're treating symptoms here. We need to get to the root issues, and that's a community effort. And it starts with educating, I think, parents on what's really at stake for their kids.
Mr. Florida?
This is a really wonderful conversation. Wait 1 second. Now you guys are catching up. This is a really wonderful conversation on a lot of fronts. And so everything I'm about to say, I want to say I'm a fan of what you're doing. I'm a fan. There's a lot of stuff that you've said you're digging through, and I can't imagine trying to dig out of it and trying to get a ship in the direction that you were hired to take. So please understand that. So number one, I hear us talking about achievement gap. I've heard that all 6.5, 7 years of my time on council. I've heard a lot of the problems didn't happen overnight. It's been a 20-year thing. Almost all of us, save maybe 1 or 2 people, were not involved for the bulk of that period where these problems have arisen. Infrastructure, literacy, discipline. I'll just put the last comments in the discipline category. I would throw a couple others in there that I'm keenly mindful of, and there's a point where I'm going with all this. Closing buildings, closing schools, redistricting, those are all things that at least I've been trying to tabulate and keep a monitor on. And I have a feeling our superintendent, I think I know what she's going to think when I say these comments. Like, hey, give me that year, give me 3 years. Like, I'm building these out, so I understand, I respect it. But those are all things that I hear of chunks and issues that we're going into. Colleagues and school board members, this conversation shouldn't happen once or twice a year. And I'm looking every single one of you, both council and school board. I have said this for 3 years in a row. We adopted a body to meet on a quarterly basis. Quarterly, it doesn't have to be monthly. That digs into this stuff so that way when you're questioning about vaping and you're talking about, well, it's fights and it's school, there are so many things that the collective group in this room, from a staff level, let alone the public, have to focus on. And we can't get into all of it. The Lifelong Learning Committee was passed, guys, and it's been 3 years, and I was told it would be coming up in summer of last year. It still hasn't happened. And all of these things can be addressed in a very productive way, I believe, so that way we're not caught off guard. We're not blindsided by a principal getting left out of another contract or deciding to leave. These are things that that committee could really entertain and get into and build more cohesion. And I'm not saying we're fractured right now. This is probably the most cohesive moment I've had with a school board in my time on council. Now would be the best time to implement this type of approach, to continue the momentum, to continue the track forward of how do we empower the superintendent to do the things she's talking about on all these plethora of items. How do we work with the manager and meet the funding gap that Dr. Wilder was talking about? You know, you proposed a $2.5 million split between the budget. You know, those are things that could be hashed out there and then brought to a full body where there's already more buy-in. We're all together. So I wanted to highlight that this is a good step. There's a lot you got to cover, but guys, I fundamentally believe we have got to get that group going. And then you would have a whole group dedicated to how can we be on the same page. We may come up with different solutions, but we know the data, we know the information, we understand what's happening. You know, hey, the budget in Richmond is doing funky things, and here's why the VRS might be messed up and all those things. So that's my challenge, is for the third year in a row, get that committee going. And finally, my question, with all that being said, is, does the manager's proposal work for you all, even though there's a $2.5 million split?
No, because if we request, let me move up. I would say no, because if we requested 4.5, we needed 4.5. However, like I've said, we will obviously adjust, and I think that there's some weight that's being held on looking at the 1.7 million that VRS says we may get. But again, it's that shell game, we don't know. But of course, if I requested 4.5, that's what I needed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The microphone is on. So a couple things that I want to highlight. One thing I just want to point out real quick. I appreciate everything that Mr. Feraldi said. I do want to make crystal clear. I do not believe that Lynchburg City Schools personnel issues should ever be the subject of any kind of joint body. I just make that clear. What you guys have going on with personnel issues is not our prerogative. For the city side, one of the things that I heard, and I think it may have come from both our superintendent and Mr. Barron, the accessibility of vapes. What do we need to do to crack down on that? Do we need to do some kind of sting operations on these vape shops? I think that if there are laws that are being broken selling vapes to minors, then we need to enforce them to the maximum extent, period. That is something that needs to be addressed. We don't need kids getting addicted to THC before they graduate high school if these people are selling this stuff to minors without any, we need to crack down on that. That's a public safety issue. We need to address it. Second thing, on the achievement gap front, and I appreciate one of the things that you addressed, ma'am, was you kind of said it's not just a race thing potentially, right? And that's the first time I've heard that said in this kind of setting. So it looks to me like you all really are looking into it. And one of the things that I would appreciate you looking into with that is this a fatherhood thing? Is the achievement gap correlated with kids that don't have dads? And if that's the case, let's just say it when you guys look into it and determine that. let's address that. If that's the elephant in the room that people don't want to talk about, well, let's address it, and let's see as a community how we can wrap ourselves around that and address that. Finally, this is something that I think I would love for you to speak to, Dr. Majette. Retention. When I see what you've asked for, you said you needed it. One thing that is critically important to me and critically important to many of the parents that I've talked to in Lynchburg City Schools and the parents of the kids that my kids are in school with and that we do Little League with and that we play football with and that we swim with is keeping veteran teachers in our school system. And that needs to be a priority of both of these bodies right now. Because if we miss the mark on that, we can't get them back. And I know there's a lot of great teachers coming out of school right now, but they're better. Those young teachers are better when they have good mentors that they're coming in to work with. And I want to make sure what we're doing is setting up this for success so that we're not missing the mark on that. Because if we end up in a situation where we have a retention crisis that we can't fix, we're going to see it through the whole system. I really believe that. And I've seen some of the changes and some personnel decisions that you've made that have literally turned schools around, where I'm seeing veteran teachers flocking to schools that normally they wouldn't have tried to work with or work at in the past, but they want to go work for these people that are leading these schools. And I see these decisions you've made, and I appreciate that. And I just want to let you know I fully trust what you're doing with that. And but as far as retention goes, I'd like you to speak to that. Is that an issue right now? Is that something that is part of all of this that you're looking at, and what do we need to do to support that?
Yes, so that is absolutely something that we're always looking at, and those are part of the structures and processes I talk about. So when I say this in terms of structures and processes, I really mean what are those things that people understand this is how we do business, and that it's carefully outlined. And so absolutely salary increases are important for teachers, but when you start thinking about, do we have so much minutia in the way of them getting an answer to something that they have a question about, or getting access to something that they need? And so those are those internal things that we're fixing. And like what Mr. Poe mentioned, those things that people don't see, we're putting those structures in place so that we can better support people. Are we providing professional development that's actually meaningful for people? Because salary is important. So absolutely salary is important, but we want to make sure, are we providing professional development that you still want to learn and grow? Whether, if I've been in this, well, I have been in this 25 years, but I still want to learn and grow. So you think about a teacher in a classroom, doesn't matter if you've been there 5 years or 20 years or 30 years, people still want that opportunity to grow and learn more. Making sure, when we talked about the alternative ed spaces and things like that, making sure that we provide a safe environment, not just for kids, but for staff, that they feel comfortable to come in and do the work that they need to do. Teaching is hard, educating is hard. It's different from even when I started 20 years ago, 25 years ago to now. It's hard work. So making sure that we have those structures there, but then also how do we loop in the parents and families to give that support to us, and the support in terms of checking your kids in the morning, making sure the kids don't have the vape, having that, you know, that conversation with them about their cell phones, and understanding basic responsibility of, you know, I hate to say that, sort of do as you're told, but go in and be respectful of your teacher. Get your work done. If they ask you to do something, they ask you to sit down doing it. And it sounds very basic, and we all learn this in kindergarten. It sounds, well, at home, but it sounds very basic. But those are the things that we realize. And I just, as you were talking, I just put a couple snapshots, and I know I'm not covering every single thing. So absolutely, having those salary increases are important. You can, I mean, you can take $20 of food line and you come out with a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk. You know, you're not going to come out with much. So we recognize with the cost of everything that we have to have those cost of living increases. But like, as you all were saying earlier, it's really such a collective thing to be able to support those teachers. So we want to make sure we're still paying them, but sometimes money, excuse me, I have to make sure I stay near the microphone. Money isn't everything when it comes to supporting a teacher, but it is a great first step to say, hey, we recognize that you're spending more just to live day to day, and we want to compensate you appropriately. But then also, how do we all collectively put in these items that we can provide that level of support for those teachers and retain them?
And just one follow-up on all that, and I appreciate all that, and thank you so much. Out of this, and you may not have this answer now, so just being able to get it when we could get it sooner rather than later, because we've got a compressed budget timeline, would be great. Out of the requests that you made, if there's any of these that can be supported by one-time funding in the local contribution that aren't necessarily operating, because like when I look at I see something here like building maintenance supplies for alt ed expansion, that when I see something like that, that looks like it may be something that's a one-time thing. If there's any of this stuff that is one-time versus ongoing, if you could just identify that breakdown for us, I think that would be super helpful as well. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I will connect with my team. I don't want to answer on behalf of my entire team, but I'll connect with them and then email Mr. Winter probably at the latest, today's Tuesday, at the latest by Thursday, and he can share it with you all. Is that okay? Okay.
Quickly.
In line with what Councilmember Mitchell was saying, going back to, well, what if we had a group that met a little more often? Step pay increases, that's something that needs to be happening. I would love to see LCS adopt something similar that the city did with public safety. That's number one. And number two, that if the dollar figure doesn't work and there's a breakdown, don't you think having a school funding formula would help us meet that end year over year? These are all things that we could be doing within this group. That's all I was trying to say. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Jaleel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to this issue overall of funding. City Council has a great opportunity to do something different than the previous city councils have done. If we do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always gotten. And Lynchburg City Schools is $100 million under in deferred maintenance and other things. And over time, that builds. We're asking for 4.5 million, and the proposal given back is 2.5, and that means we'll have to find the rest that we're still looking for. We're still needing that, and so we're going to be going under. And I suppose that this has happened over the years, over and over, that Lynchburg City Schools has asked for a certain amount, and they've often been given less than that amount. So it kind of compounds over the years, and we have what we have today. The community, I've heard, was a great idea to involve as much as possible, but the community is not going to pay the compensation that we desire for specific positions. The community is not going to pay for the insurance increase. The community is not going to provide the specialists for free that we're asking for. So this particular 4.5 million is specific to things that the community more than likely cannot step in the gap and help us with. That's City Council's job. That's where we're asking you for this amount of money. And as someone mentioned, now is the best time for implementation. Yes, with $4.5 million. Now is the best time to empower the superintendent. Yes, with $4.5 million. You don't have to imagine how we're digging out of this hole, digging out of our problems, because it's displayed right there. It's $4.5 million. And we don't have the capacity and ability to go out and do all the things that need to be done to get this money in. But City Council does. You have the ability to find these funds, raising these funds, and much more to the capacity than we have to cut to get these funds. This is the need we're asking for a reason. You've given us the responsibility to crunch the numbers and go through the processes of saying what we need here and what we need there. That's our job. That's the job you've given to us, and we've done that. We've talked to our administrators, and all the department heads are working on it, and this is what we've come out with, $4.5 million. So we're asking that, and I wish we could go more thoroughly into the cell phones issues and the vapes, and there's gangs and all those things. I wish we could just finish this one part of the discussion of, are we going to receive the 4.5 million? Done. Okay, let's talk a full-fledged discussion on all these, not peripheral necessarily, but similarly important issues that will make the whole environment of LCS schools go well and better. If we could get this funding done and out of the way, we can discuss other things to a deeper degree. Let's make this happen.
Ms. Reed?
Thank you. So quick question, just I'm remembering, so we have $30 million allocated in the CIP for the schools this year, correct? Correct. Okay, that was what we voted on last year for this year. So, and then you're asking for an additional, can we go back to what the request was in your total request for infrastructure or improvements, building improvements? Oh, sorry. Okay. And just because some people asked me to ask, school closures, none planned right now? Nothing forecasted, nothing discussed?
As chairman of the Finance and Facilities Committee, at this time, we are not looking at closing any schools.
Okay.
However, as part of the 5-year strategic plan, if it's something that we may need to look at 2, 3, 4 years down the road, that's when we'll look at it. But at this time, there is no plan on the table to close any schools.
Okay, and then, thank you. And then I did hear something about Bass being changed from a year-round school to a traditional school. Is that correct?
No, that's incorrect.
Okay.
With Bass Elementary, what was happening with Bass, it still remains a year-round school, but instead of starting at the same time with us, they ended at the same time with us. And so with working with the staff, and I will tell you, initially, I did look at it as, how do we move everybody to a traditional school so that we can better align our resources? Of course, working with the staff there, and it was a strong push of, well, we really want to remain a year-long school. This best supports our kids, our students, and then also they just had the transition the previous year of having students move over from Heritage Elementary there. And so in looking at that, we wanted to make sure that our professional development was aligned and our PD days were aligned, and they weren't this year. And apparently they haven't been. So we're starting the year together, and then they'll end a little bit later. And that way all teachers in the division are getting professional development. So, because you always have, we have great teachers, but I hate for teachers at Bass to not get the same professional development when somebody comes in to do it, or they can't teach professional development sessions to students at teachers at Bedford Hills, because we're all on, I'm just using an example, because we're all on a different schedule. So they're still year round. They'll have a little bit of a interesting summer this summer, because it'll be a little bit different. It's a transition year for them, but we'll still have Jumpstart. So there'll be sort of a Jumpstart intercession for them like they normally do, but they'll start at the same time as us, but as a traditional calendar, but end a little bit later. So they're still year round. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. That was just clarification for some people that wanted me to ask some of these questions for today, and I wanted to get that out there so that now they know and it's out there. And that is one thing. I know this isn't a budget question, but I think I'd be curious, because I think that Bass is one of our higher rated schools as far as SOL scores. Is that correct? Or with maybe, or testing? Is it?
They may have been, but not now. No, ma'am.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Poe. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just want to say that it sounds like we have overlapping issues that are going to take overlapping solutions. When kids, get in trouble, then you have public safety, police department has to get involved. We were just over touring the new police facility and they're looking for recruitment. And when we can teach kids, you know, how to conduct themselves in different professions. And, you know, Mayor Taylor has talked about learning how to read a ruler, going over to CVCC to their STEM program and in different colleges. And, you know, the funding and the money, we talk about teacher retention, all these things are going to always circle back to the funding. But I think if we really start to work together and make a collaborative effort, we'll begin to attract more. I mean, when our schools are doing well, economic development, that's an easier job on them, because when companies come in and they know we have strong schools, then they're going to want to plant themselves right here in Lynchburg. So I think we really need to keep the focus on making sure that we're working together. You know, when I was a kid, you didn't have to do travel basketball and different things of that nature. Parks and Rec had a robust system of basketball and football and different things of that nature. And I think it's time that we really start to bring those things back and tie them into education. And I think we'll start to see an improvement. Fatherhood is a big part of it, but I believe it's actually mother and father, and just bringing that whole system around. But it's also culture, social issues, economic issues. And if we start producing, you know, better children and better facilities and better structure, it's not about the buildings or anything. Lynchburg is about the people. So we just need to keep that in mind as we move forward. And I appreciate Mr. Ferraldi's suggestion about meeting more often. I would say that would probably be helpful, so we can, you know, move together and move forward. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Mr. Connor?
I just wanted to say, in reference to the multiple things working together, teacher retention, we're looking at the alternative education things we're looking at is one of the priorities of our discipline committee this year has been make our schools a safe place for the students and the teachers. We're doing sometimes between 15 and 20 cases a week as volunteer school board members. And we're there from 3:30 to sometimes 8 or 9 at night, just doing case after case, because we want teachers to retain, if they feel safe in their building, enjoy coming to work. I think that will, you know, not just financially, not just, you know, got to pay them and everything, but I think if we make it a safe place to work, if we can work with our police department on these vapes, and it's not just the nicotine vapes, these are THC vapes, and we've had some students that actually got sick in school from these things. So we're addressing those. We're handling those real seriously, and that's why we really need to do an alternative, because we found that some of our restorative practices work, but what we would run into is the person was great in 6th grade. It was 7th grade that they fell off the wagon, and we don't have a 7th grade restorative. Or they were great in 9th grade, but, you know, 10th grade, something happened over the summer in 10th grade. So now they're in 10th grade and so we want to make sure that we're able to address each student at the place where they're at, not limited to like 6th grade or 9th grade. And we also need to have the space to do it and the staff to do it. And so that's what, when you see, and I thank Mr. Misjuns for mentioning that. Some of that is probably can be one-time money, but we will need to increase staff and specialists to handle these different behaviors. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, because we want to keep teacher retention. And the same thing, when we get the right alternative in place, it will have an effect on the achievement gap, because some of these students just need, if it's for one semester or one school year, because what we're also doing is we're handling it case by case in the discipline. Everybody's not getting, you're out for 364. Some people are getting 20 days. Whatever time we think that they need to learn these behavior corrections is what we're trying to assign based on the behavior that they're is showing us in the classroom. So we're trying to make sure that we assign them into an alternative place where they can actually learn the skills necessary to address those behaviors. So those are some of the things that we're doing. Some of it costs money and some of it is just, like I said, we can't expect, and we wanted to focus as far as closing a school and that. We wanted to make sure that this year we focused on academics. We didn't want the distraction of closing a school. It's very emotional. People got charged up. We want to focus on improving our academics, getting away from being we should not be 122 out of 131. We should, but we can't do it in 6 months, 9 months, 8 months. But we have to address it. And I think our superintendent is putting in a process that we're meeting the needs and looking at license and making sure all of our teachers are properly licensed and making sure that our teachers and our staff is properly categorized. We have people working they're in one category and we found that they should be in another. And I think our human resources is doing a great job of getting all those things. So it's a lot to it. But I think when we sit down a year from now, we're going to say, wow, look what we've done and look what's been accomplished.
Yes, Ms. Lowry.
Just to put some context to what Mr. Connor was saying, my first year I was on the discipline committee, we had about 5 or 6 that we all saw. So we've gone from that number to 15 in 2 years. That's just how serious the issue is.
Mr. Bauer.
I do want to speak to that. One of the things I'm sitting here thinking about, because I'm there week after week, listening to these kids, listening to these cases, there's a lot of ways we get to the numbers that we're getting to. And one of them, I believe, is because we're raising the standard and we're holding kids accountable. And that hasn't always happened in the past. And I can't speak to any particular reason why, et cetera, but just remember that part of the reason we see an increase in numbers because we're saying we're going to hold kids accountable. We're going to hold the standard higher because we believe they are capable of more. And so when we see these kids, I don't want people to come away thinking, oh my gosh, they have 16 cases every week. We got some bad kids in this town. I want to reiterate what our superintendent already said. We don't have, these kids aren't bad kids. These kids are kids that are very intelligent. I mean, you sit there and listen to them, you talk to them, you hear them talk about, their situations that they come from and the things that they're dealing with. It's mind-bending when you consider what they're facing, and yet their potential is astronomical. So we have to be careful that we don't. One of the things I think is important for us as we talk about expanding alternative education is the destigmatization of alternative education. It's not a minimum security prison. That's not the point. It's truly an alternative education program. And it's for students who just function better in a smaller environment or with certain supports and systems. And we need that. And I'm going to continue to, I've got my 3 T's this year, but I'm already shifting to my 3 focuses for the next year. And one of them is going to be alternative education. I just think it's so critical. And I think one of the reasons it's so critical is we talk about the achievement gap. We have to remember before there was an achievement gap, there was an opportunity gap. And that's how we land at the achievement gap is there are not equal opportunities presented to our children. And not all of that's the school system's fault or the city's fault. Some of that lays on parents and families, but it's a community effort for us to make sure that all opportunities are equally accessible to all students. There's transportation involved in that. There's education and training for families involved in that. There's a lot of factors. But I want to remind us that when we talk about achievement gap, we first have to address the opportunity gap. Thank you.
The 3 deans for middle school, that's on top of the principals. You're going to have the principal plus 3 deans?
Yes, you would have 1 dean at each middle school. So 1 dean there to help with discipline. And
full-time positions.
Yes, and it would be a teacher salary. So it would be someone, our goal would have someone, because you always want to build your pipeline. So you want to have someone that's working on their administration and supervision degree, someone who's working towards an assistant principal position, but that person would be it would be paid on a teacher scale. And you're essentially just working with students with discipline issues and those things, and just sort of filling in the gap.
That salary, what is that, 213,000?
Yes, because that's for all three combined, salary and benefits.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And also, I raised quite a few boys. And from 6th grade through 9th grade, they can't sit still. You can keep them in the classroom for 3 hours. After that, you know, Mike, them boys got to get up and do something. So I'm suggesting that we come up with a plan, vocational education somewhere, especially for kids. They need something to look forward to. A child needs something to look forward to every day. You put them in a shop class or a homemade class and she making a fabric or something, she look forward to that. So she's gonna stay in that class and do what she needs to do to go to that other space where she can express herself. Vocational education for all our kids. That's something we need to look at, and we have some partners that want to help us. You, Ms. Superintendent, and myself, we're gonna meet with Framatome and talk to them about their nuclear program so we can implement that in our starting elementary schools. And they're gonna help us with our budget, I believe. If we get partners like that, we can move this thing forward. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, go ahead. Did you want me to go? Or do you want me to wait? No. Am I good to speak? Yes. I wasn't sure who you called on. I'm sorry. So Mayor Taylor, yes, I do thank you for that. And yes, I've been waiting for our meeting with Framatome. I know we've been talking about it. So we have relatively robust career and technical education, but it's really a matter of we recognize, and as our team and I have talked about, we recognize that we have to do, and when I say we have to do a better job of funneling kids in those opportunities and making sure that we get that participation up in there and kids are completing those pathways. But as with anything, we can always expand and continue to grow. And we have a really great resources right here with the Regional Business Alliance. They've been amazing. I went to my first superintendent's breakfast with them a few weeks back. We have another one coming up in June. And they have been we're actually our entire administrative team, because Lynchburg City Lynchburg City Schools hadn't been represented as well in that workforce academy that they provide every summer, so we can go in and see Framatome and we can see some of the local businesses. So actually, and when I say administrative team, I don't mean just this crew behind me, but principals have been invited, school counselors, because we need to go out and actually see firsthand what these businesses provide, because we can't help you go down that pipeline if we don't know it and we're not well versed ourselves. So it's 2 days in July that Ms. Lucas and her team is going to work with us and take us through. And I think some other localities are involved as well. So I fully recognize that. And yes, sir, we'll continue to build that and grow that. Yes, sir.
Mr. Arlene?
Some of what is being said. And I know if you kind of listen to all that we're saying, you could get the impression like the system is falling apart. And I don't want us to kind of go away with that, because for my little time on the board, school board, I've seen a lot of things behind the scenes, a lot of work is being done. And even with the committee that we have, the disciplinary committee, I know it's a lot of work on these individuals that are working on it. And I've been in a few times, quite a bit to be challenged with from week to week. But then when you look at the system, as I've just seen the numbers here, again, we're talking about 7,500 kids. And when you look at the percentage of those kids that are basically coming before the committee, I don't know if you could really, charge the system as one that is crumbling. I think there are a lot of positive things still going on in the school system. And maybe we could capitalize a little bit more sometimes on some of the positive things that are happening, more so than some of the ugly things in terms of the discipline. So I just kind of want to encourage us that we're on a good trajectory with the superintendent. She's doing an excellent job, and we are here to support her. And City Council, I would like to encourage you all, if it be within your power, to give us the funding so we can continue this good work that we are embarking upon. And the last thing I would say in terms of academic achievement and so on, again, I don't want us to throw all the weight down on the school system, on the teachers. I always want to look at this as a collaborative effort. There are lots of ways that we could approach this as well. For example, we have a lot of empty churches over here from week to week, big buildings that are sitting. Possibility that we could collaborate with some school system, some of the churches, and have a backup after school program that will help to support the school system and facilitate what they're doing. We also have parental involvement. I mean, there used to be days when parents would read to their children. You know, we seemingly lost that whole art of trying to help educate our own children. So think of it, if we had parental involvement, and then we have some ecclesiastical or church involvement, and then the school system functioning as well, we have a three-pronged system at least trying to work to promote success in the kids, I think we could achieve a little bit more and without having a whole lot of frustration. So there's some broad things that I think we can consider, but in the meantime, let's look at some of the positive things that are happening. Out of 7,500 kids that are coming in there every day to school, and then you got a small percentage coming before the committee. I don't think that's awfully bad. That's all I got to say.
Ms. Timmer?
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Pastor Arlene. I really appreciate the insight and the focus of your comments. This is kind of echoing in a number of my peers, but I really want to commend our new superintendent as well as the school board. This is a tough year for anyone. It's a tough year for anyone. Anyone who would have sat in that seat, it would have been a tough year because we had to go backwards in order to go forwards. And you all are doing the work to make that happen. And putting sustainable structures in place and shifting culture takes time. And so thank you so much for that work. This is kind of echoing one of Mr. Mission's concerns. I think it arose because culturally, when there's not accountability, you have two extremes that often emerge in that situation where you have lawlessness and you have excellence come out of that same environment. And so how do we harness the excellence that came out of that environment while dealing with the lack of sustainable structures that were not in place to create accountability? And so that, I think, is the task for your next year. And that is a challenging task. And I believe we are all behind you and encouraging of you in your capability to tackle it. As far as the funding, I would also echo Mr. Mission's comments as far as whatever you can send to us in regards to the nature of one-time funding opportunities within this list. I think that's where the most flexibility is available in order to close a gap. And so we want to be behind you. We want to support you. We want to be sustainable in our support of you fiscally as well. But thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Appreciate it.
Mr. Mitchell? Sorry, Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Deemer was waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dr. Christie, I just want to reiterate what my colleagues have already said. You did jump in the plane and take over the control stick, and it's a tough one. You got some troubled passengers we're dealing with. I don't think it's as bad as sometimes the media portrays it. I agree with Dr. Eileen that there are a lot of good kids, percentage-wise, over the bad, but one troublesome one can ruin a classroom pretty quickly. So we've got to be strong, and we've got to take strong positions. I'd like to see us focus our efforts on truancy, attendance, because if you can't show up, you can't learn. I'd like us to focus on homework, because from what I understand, homework can be turned in late and there's no consequences. And there needs to be consequences. My mother was a first grade teacher, and back in her day, almost every child came out of there reading. That was the way it was. So it can be done. We've got to figure out how to get there somehow, maybe. But you are doing great things, and I want to encourage you. Keep it up. We've got your back. We hear your requests, and we're going to make sure that we honor your service and your willingness to jump in and do something and make a difference. And I've already seen some results. I hope people will be patient and wait for those results to continue to show up, because I believe they will. So thank you, to your team back here. A lot of thankless work. You're dealing with some of the toughest situations around. People don't understand the difference between private, public, but you guys know what's going on. And you're doing some tough work. You're doing God's work. And maybe what we need is more involvement of God's people, as Pastor Eileen said, because I think that I'm praying for a miracle in our public schools in Lynchburg. I would love to see something grand happen, and only he can get the credit for it. So thank you.
What's the mission?
Want to echo a lot of the comments that my peers have made here today. And one of the things that I just want to point out, I looked at the Weldon Cooper Center for Public Policy and looked at some information about school-aged population against participation in the public schools. And something that you'll see that's kind of interesting: Harrisonburg, 80%, Roanoke, 72%, Danville, 64%, Charlottesville, 62%, Lynchburg, 58%. So something to consider is, for a long time, this 20-year period that you talk about before you, people have left the schools. You know, you mentioned earlier that the majority of the population in our schools is Black. But I just looked at the Lynchburg Regional Business Alliance website, and the Black population in Lynchburg is 27.6%. What do we need to do? And I think that you're starting to do it, to make people want to come back to these schools. Because if we can attract families back to Lynchburg City Schools, because it's providing a great education, because it's a great academic experience, there's so many things that it has to offer that you can't get everywhere else. That's also going to help with some of these revenue issues. Granted, I know it costs more to teach more kids, but the funding is based on pupils. We've got a very large homeschool population in Lynchburg. That's something that I know I've discussed with you and Ms. Davis. And, you know, I think that there are opportunities out there as far as looking at part-time options and trying to push the envelope on offerings and marketing to homeschool families. If you haven't seen the herpetology lab in Dunbar, the first time I got to tour that, we had Dunbar staff teaching Liberty University students about reptiles, because they've got this beautiful facility in there that you just can't replicate elsewhere. And when you look at those different things, CTE programs, I know the mayor's very interested in looking at career and technical education programs. Same thing. What are we doing to try to, if we're making an environment where homeschool families might feel safe to participate in a part-time capacity in some of these programs, what are we doing to market to them and saying, hey, we want to be a partner with you and help you if there's something you want to do, if there's some way you want to participate? I think that's a huge opportunity, because there's also funding that comes with that too. So I just appreciate, when I look at that number, the 58%, it just tells me the only direction we can go is up from here. And I've got full confidence in you that you're going to be pushing us in that direction. And I appreciate everything you're doing. And most of all, I appreciate your focus on making sure that we look for academic success, because that is what you're here for. And it's very clear that that's your priority. And I thank you for that.
We thank you, Ms. Majette, for all that you do. We're proud of you. And is there anyone else? Okay, this meeting adjourned. Our next meeting is at 7 o'clock, City Hall.